Good evening, wrestling fans. Welcome to the GCRN Podcast Arena for the GeekCast Radio Top 100 Wrestlers Countdown. Coming to the ring are your hosts, representing the GCRN, Kevin Optimus Solo Thompson.
Money isn't everything, it's the only thing.
And representing RatingHipster.com, TV's Mr. Neil.
The whole wrestling world is going to stand up and take notice.
And from the Great White North, representing This Week in Geek, Alex White Heat Ritchie.
On board!
And finally, from Parts Unknown, representing Simplistic Reviews, Matthew, no nickname needed, Stewart.
You know what? You have a malignant case of wall-to-wall dumb. You're stupid!
And now, here is our main event. 100 wrestlers enter. Who will be number one? Let's find out. Let's get ready to podcast.
Hello, everybody, to another special episode of the GeekCast Radio Network. Today, we are starting another one of our top 100 countdowns. I am your host, Optimus Solo, and joining me today, I have assembled the best Survivor Series team I could come up with. Joining me is Matthew Stewart from Simplistic Reviews. Hello.
Hello, and the first thing you want to do is get you piece of crap out of my ring.
TV is Mr. Neil. Hello.
I'm here to kick ass and chew bubble gum, and I'm all out of kick ass. No, shit.
And from This Week in Geek and various GeekCast Radio things, Alex, how are we doing?
Pretty good, and I didn't prepare anything funny, so we'll just go with hi.
Yeah, you got to rely on the other two for the comedy. So basically, if you guys did not see this, or if you haven't been keeping track of what we've been promoting here recently, we are going to be doing a top 100 wrestlers list. So a bit ago, we did our Wars tournament with our tag teams. We've also been posting some individual matchups this last week on Facebook for, kind of spawn the discussion about which wrestlers deserve a spot in the top 100 or who should be higher than who. So that's the kind of stuff we're going to be getting into today. We're going to be revealing our 100 through 76, and then there will be 3 additional episodes as we reveal 25 wrestlers each time as we make our way to the number 1 spot. If you guys have never listened to a top 100 episode before, we've done a few of these. We've done top 100 animated series. We did top 100 animated films, top 100 television series, and a few other ones along the way that you guys can go back into the archives and check up if you like what we do today. Before we kind of get into the nuts and bolts, so I want to give each of you guys a quick opportunity to just kind of give a very small synopsis of kind of what your background is with wrestling, kind of maybe the eras or the time periods you watched, the companies you watched, just so people kind of have an idea of where you're coming from. So Alex, why don't we start with you? What's your quick background in wrestling?
Okay, so as a little kid, like before school age, I would watch with my grandfather, and it would be stuff like I think it would have been reruns, because I think Andre the Giant was already out of it by then, but I would just watch with my grandfather, and he'd be laughing his head off as Andre the Giant would fight midgets or whatever gimmicky thing they had at him. And that's what I thought wrestling was, and Hulk Hogan and all that junk. I was out of it for many years, even though some of my friends were watching it in like 7th, 8th grade, high school, when the Attitude Era was on, but it wasn't my thing. I just knew the people from mostly the movies they did afterwards. And then I came back into it when I went back to college in my mid-20s, and in the summertime, I was so incredibly bored. I had a summer semester I was doing, and it was right around the time CM Punk and Daniel Bryan were getting big. And I watched then, and then I sort of started absorbing everything. And I mean everything, all around the world. I watch everything now. So if I have a preference, I don't necessarily I don't hate a lot of the flippy dippy stuff that's out there now, but I don't necessarily like the flippy dippy stuff. I kind of like the wrestling to be as realistic as possible while still having, a flair for the entertainment.
Okay, fair enough. Matthew, what is your background with wrestling as a form of entertainment?
I think I remember. I used to watch it a lot with my dad, and I was always a big fan of the early 90s gimmick wrestling. I loved occupational gimmicks. I thought they were the most hilarious things. ever. The theme songs, like Repo Man, is probably still one of my favorite characters ever created. Between his theme song, very synthy, and you have that little cool piano breakdown on it. It's fantastic stuff. And then when the Monday Night Wars came around, that was in middle school for me, 7th, 8th grade. I was totally in on it because it had that, like Alex is saying, it still had the realistic quality of wrestling to it with a dynamic storyline, if you want to call it dynamic, of course. And then after kind of everything consolidated into each other, into one entity, WWE, just kind of lost interest. I didn't watch any of the ruthless aggression era. Just wasn't a big fan of that stuff. And then I don't know how I really got back into it. I think it was out of sheer boredom, and you started having a lot of the New Japan stuff started rising up, where it was like actual real wrestling seemed to come back in the forefront. Not minimal storylines, but just straight up wrestling. And I don't know. It's funny how my relationship with wrestling is, because I remember my best memory is probably going to the old Miami Arena back in, I think, probably 93 or 94 and watching Big Boss Man fighting IRS. And I don't know, it's always been in my mind, and I've gone in and out of it. But now with AEW coming out and other just different forms of, I don't want to say different forms, but different options, it's great that we're getting a bigger pool of wrestlers to go from, and not just have WWE be the one conglomerate you have to go to now. So it's exciting time for wrestling fans.
Absolutely, and that's another reason why it's a good reason for us to kind of talk about this now as we kind of enter a new phase maybe in the history of wrestling. Mr. Neil, what was your background in wrestling real quick?
I think I jumped in around WrestleMania 3, Hulk Hogan versus Andre the Giant, and I stayed through, the Macho Man, the Warrior, Undertaker, and even after Hulk left, I was a big fan of Bret Hart. I stayed through pretty much all of the New Generation era until he finally lost at WrestleMania 12, and I said, "That's it. I'm done. I'm done with wrestling. This is really embarrassing." So I stopped, and then I think later that summer I saw heel Hulk Hogan cutting a mean promo on WCW, and I just got sucked back in, and there I stayed until the original brand split, and I kind of phased out after I think 2005 or so.
Okay. My background, I started watching as a kid, probably 1987, 88, somewhere in that range. So kind of watched the whole Hogan, Macho Man, et cetera, like you guys were just talking about. Watched it all the way through probably the early 90s. My friends and I were big into it. We would perform all the moves in the backyard pool and stuff like that, because then you could throw people and it wouldn't hurt. I think when I lost interest the first time was after, if I'm trying to pinpoint like a specific time, right around the time where Tatanka got beat from his undefeated streak by some douchebag named Ludwig Borga. I was done after that, because he was my favorite wrestler at the time, and that guy was a piece of garbage. So I stopped watching. A few years later, I just randomly started watching WCW just because I was like, hey, I know all these guys. And then, of course, very shortly after that, NWO happened. I watched NWO until it went off the rails. And once kind of WCW started tanking, I abandoned ship with them. I did not want to see something that was just WWE, and I was upset that they lost the war, kind of. And then just randomly, probably in the last, 3-4 years, I've just vicariously watched stuff here and there a little bit, mainly the pay-per-views. Since I got the WWE network, I just watch those. I don't watch Raw, I don't watch SmackDown. And then, of course, with the AEW and the emergence there, it stoked my interest once again, so I'm all aboard. So one thing I want to kind of tell you guys as far as how this top 100 is created for the listeners here is we basically compile a bunch of different people's lists. We asked everybody to rank 100 wrestlers, and we just kind of compile the data, and whoever gets the most votes and the most points, because if you rank someone 1, counts more than if you rank someone 100, and I do all the math and figure out how it all stacks up. So what we're not doing here is we're not necessarily saying that these are the top 100 wrestlers of all time, just to get out that out there. This is just a way for us to discuss wrestlers, discuss wrestling. And in a way, though, as I guess in a wrestling way, kind of kayfabe or whatever you want to call it, we are going to take it serious though, and we are going to be acting like it is a top 100, and we're going to be arguing and debating who's worthy, who's not, who should be higher and who shouldn't be, because it's fun, and that's what we like to do in these top 100s. And then you guys can also leave comments on the website page, the Facebook page, Twitter, whatever, on what your opinions are, if you think we got something right, wrong, or whatever. It's just a fun interaction and discussion the whole way through. Another thing that I want to kind of get out before we get into the actual appearances of wrestlers on this countdown is there will be some biases, or biases, I guess is the proper pronunciation of that. And I'm interested to see what you guys think those might be. So some things that I'm thinking off the top of my head that we might be looking out for throughout this countdown. We always have different biases that we look at in all these different countdowns, and they end up being different things, of course, because they're different content. But one thing I thought of was the appearances of women on the list, if we would see a bias against that, or if we would see a few of those crack the top 100, different regional things, whether we are, obviously we're going to be somewhat biased towards stuff that we were able to watch in America. So how many, Mexican or stars from Japan are we going to see? Is there going to be any leaning towards certain companies, WCW, ECW, WWE, New Japan, etc., or just eras? Is the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s, is there, the classic wrestlers, are they going to be slighted against because we didn't grow up with them, or things of that nature? Just give you guys a real quick chance to kind of sound off on what you're interested in, what you're looking for, what you're fearful of as we get into the countdown. And another thing that you might comment on is, how will this type of ranking treat tag teams? And we're not talking about, when they put random single wrestler together with random single wrestler. We're talking about teams that were, notoriously known as a tag team. How will that hurt or help them, or will individual members of tag teams be able to outshine their tag team partners, things of that nature? So starting with Matthew, just kind of what kind of things do you think we might reveal about ourselves, I guess, as we go through this countdown?
I think us all coming in from maybe the same generation of watching wrestling, that could probably skew our opinion perhaps on the wrestlers that are coming, because I assume we're all between the ages of 30 and 40 at this point. So we probably all grew up with the late 80s, mid 80s, all the way up until current wrestlers now. But I also think with the advent of the internet, of course, the wonderful, glorious, horrible internet that we have been able to at least rediscover things or find things that we haven't been able to see before, such as stuff from, maybe stuff that's in Lucha Underground or Lucha Libre Wrestling, or New Japan Pro Wrestling, things like that. So, and of course with the WWE Network, that has helped out just rediscovering stuff from the 60s, 70s, 80s, and all these other regional promotions that a lot of us probably didn't grow up with. I mean, I grew up in Florida, so I didn't get to see a lot of stuff that maybe in the territories up in the north, like the WWE or WWF or things like that. So, or Smoky Mountain Wrestling, things like that. So it will be interesting to see how our takes on the top 100 are. And I hopefully I want women to get their due, because there are some fantastic female wrestlers that did a lot for the industry, as well as minority wrestlers, from all walks of life. So I'm interested to see how the list shakes out and what our opinions are in the matter too. So,
Neil, what do you think? What are going to be some of our biases, and how do we treat tag teams when it comes to this? Are they all going to be left behind?
Hard to say. I don't. See, I come from an era in which the tag teams were very much separated from the big main eventers, so I think there was a little bias on my part to not maybe include as many tag team wrestlers in my list as I probably should have. But I don't really know. I am interested to get into some of the other, since I'm such a classic wrestling fan, I'm kind of interested in hearing about a lot of the other wrestlers that were around in the 80s that I wasn't aware of, because they were either in AWA or NWA or USWA or whatever the Jerry Lawler one was, because I really didn't get to watch those back in the day. And I should actually get the network and actually watch some of that old footage. But I'm not as familiar with that stuff as like I should be, because I was very much into a lot of those guys later on when they showed up in WWF and WCW for the Monday Night Wars. And that's really that's really the thought that I have at the moment.
Okay, absolutely. Alex, what do you think?
Well, I come from Bizarro land, aka north of the border, right? So there's going to be, our country traditionally was divided into anything west of Ontario was Stampede that people watched. Anything east of Ontario, like Quebec, would have been whatever French programming they were watching. And then Ontario was sort of like lumped in with New York. So Maple Leaf Gardens in Toronto would had Maple Leaf Wrestling, and that was basically WWF. So if it wasn't WWF or local promotions, we didn't really see anything until the advent of cable. And once cable came out, if you wanted to get like WCW, you had to have like the $60 or $70 cable package. It was on channel like 70 something. So it wasn't like a basic cable package could get it. So it wasn't until the late 90s that we would really see anything other than WWF. Now, because of that, there might be a bias for, anybody that was traditionally a heel but Canadian might still just be higher ranked by us. It's like the whole home country thing. As far as tag teams go, I think there will be a bias for some tag team people will do better if they also had a career as a singles wrestler at some point. If they were just purely tag team their entire career, that might not get ranked as high.
Yeah, I can definitely see that happening as well. Also, just a quick disclaimer for the rest of the record. I'm going to do my best in the editing booth to try to make this as clean as it can be, but just bear with me. I am going to be going back and forth between about 25 different pages of wrestler information as well as our main spreadsheet and other things. So I will try to keep the clicking to a minimum, and I will try to edit everything out. But if you do hear that, just take that into consideration, I guess. What I like to do real quick before we get into our number 100 is just give you guys a tease as to the 5 that didn't make the list but came the closest. And before we do that, just a heads up on point totals because I might reference them here and there. Basically, if you ranked someone 100, that got them 1 point. So 10 people could rank someone 100, that only gives them 10 points. In order to make the list, you had to be over 100 points. Just to give you a little bit of a reference in that, I won't say exactly where, but basically 130s and up would get you a spot on the list. We had over 270 wrestlers that got ranked. So from 270, we go down to 100. But before we get to there, the 5 that came closest would be, with 126 points, we had Roman Reigns. With 129 points, we had Bobby Roode. 130, a more classic guy there, Greg the Hammer Valentine. 133, Sergeant Slaughter. And the person that came the closest that didn't make the cut at 101, AJ Lee. So, Alex, just hearing those 5 names, any thoughts before we reveal number 100?
No love for Bobby. I think with Bobby's issue being that he was with TNA for 12 years, so nobody saw him.
Yeah,
really, even though the work he did there was great. Slaughter, it's a little surprising at first until you realize, have any of us actually seen him wrestle a match?
One time.
I think
it was very bloody.
I was going to say, his career was basically over before most of us were born, and he was mostly just there for the military shtick.
The commission and stuff like that.
Commissioner Slaughter, yeah.
Right.
Like
even though he probably did decent
DX.
work. I know that he's credited as one of the first guys to use music, like with the whole entrance and everything. So he's got that going for him. AJ, kind of surprising, but no, again, I think some of this has to do with how long people's careers were. Right, so not a significantly long enough career, and also being the best wrestler in your group during a time when wrestling was terrible isn't really saying much. like how would this have gone if, let's say, you moved the time frame to, instead of 5 years in the business then, to 5 years leading into current times? I don't know how the ranking would have changed there.
Matthew, Roman Reigns does not make the list. How many Samoans do you think will?
I mean,
The rest of them.
I think every other cousin he probably has will probably make the list. I'm sure at this point, especially one cousin in particular, which I'm sure we'll be getting to that much later on the list.
The correct answer is just say Haku gets the number one spot so he doesn't squeeze our head and have our eyes pop out or whatever.
Haku, one of the meanest guys you'll ever meet. I've never met him, thank God. I probably wouldn't be talking to you guys on this podcast right now. It's interesting to see both Bobby Roode. I think he's just been buried by WWE. He had a hot start with NXT. Everybody thought he was going to rise up. He has probably one of the best entrances, and everybody's really into it. So that's fun. But he just kind of got buried in the roster of not being able to really showcase anything he did from TNA. I'm happy to see that AJ Lee is like at least skirting the edge of the top 100. But yeah, to your point, Alex, I mean, being the best female wrestler in an era of horrible female wrestlers, that probably doesn't help. However, her pipe bomb, quote unquote, I'm sure everybody remembers that, as well as her husband's pipe bomb, which I'm sure we'll talk about him later too. So it's interesting. And Greg the Hammer Valentine, I mean, I always liked Greg the Hammer Valentine. He had that super awesome 80s look with the mullet. He was so rad, and he's on the outside looking in, but it's still good to hear his name in at least the conversation that we're having right now.
Absolutely. And those are the only 5 that you're going to know did not make the countdown. For the rest, you're going to have to wait until we reveal all the members to know who did and who didn't. And it'll be interesting to see as we get closer and closer to the end if people are getting nervous about their favorite wrestlers that have not been named yet, that they're wondering if they're going to be left off entirely. So today we're going from 100 to 76. That takes us from the 137 point total all the way up to the 200 point total. So that's what we will be revealing today. And we are starting today off with a tie. So there is actually a tie for the number 100 spot between 2 individuals. I'm just randomly going to pick which one we're going to talk about first, but they both tied with 137 points. You also, throughout this thing, might hear some entrance musics or some sound bites or different things, depending on how creative we want to get, again, in the editing booth. But let's start off with... William Regal at the 100 spots. And I will go through some of the different names they had and some of their accomplishments, and then I will be asking the guys on their opinions. So obviously mainly known as either Steven Regal or William Regal, although in early days he was Darren Matthews and Hellraiser. Spent a good part of the 90s in WCW and a good part of the 2000s in WWE. He did win a variety of titles, including WCW World Television Champion 4 times, WWF Hardcore Champion 5 times, WWF European Champion 4 times, Intercontinental Champion twice, 4 tag team titles with the likes of Lance Storm on 2 occasions, Eugene once, and Tajiri once, King of the Ring in 2008, and Dave Meltzer and his Wrestling Observer voted him the best television announcer in both 2013 and in 2014. Let's start with TV's Mr. Neil. What do you think of Lord Steven Regal starting off our countdown?
Oh, I love Steven Regal. Also William Regal. Can't make up his mind what name he has. I love that he's this stuffy English guy, especially in WWF where they had him kind of overpronounced Triple H's name. I always called him Triple H, which is how the English people pronounce that. Very much overpronouncing it. It's crazy. Really solid in WCW. Kind of had this infamous match with Goldberg, where allegedly he got let go because he was a little stiff with Goldberg or something. Or no, he didn't. I forget. But
he wasn't really going by the script. He was making him work for the win, basically.
Yeah, basically, yeah. And but really a solid wrestler. Really funny. It's really all
style all his own.
Yeah, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
And Matthew, let's ask for the first time here. We're going to ask it 1,000 times for the rest of these records, but is William Regal deserving of being in the top 100?
I think so. He had that crossover appeal with both WCW and WWF, and even before that, I don't know his career before the 2 majors, what his career was maybe in the British wrestling scene. But I always liked his style. I mean, great tag team wrestler as well. So we had that crossover appeal with being with the Blue Bloods, and then being a single wrestler in and of himself, and then of course being when he moved, and I love the Goldberg thing because hearing the stories about Goldberg, how he was the golden child, and he was the one guy that said, "Well, bloody hell, I'm not going to let him make a mockery of me. I'm going to make him work for this win." So I love stuff like that. And of course, was he the first member of the Vince McMahon Kiss My Ass Club?
Oh, I don't know.
Yes.
You did. If anything, you need to add that to his list of accomplishments because that's a very big accomplishment for Lord Steven Regal, the man's man, whatever you want to call him. And that gimmick, a man's man, is great too. The theme song for that was great. I'm big on entrance themes, and if it works, by golly, I'm going to go with that too. So I'm glad he made the top 100. I like these early picks because you get the kind of random wrestlers that just crack in that top 100. So
my earliest memories of him are when he was really into that whole Blue Bloods thing with Earl Robert Eaton and Squire Dave Taylor in WCW. That was crazy talk.
Put their noses up like, you disgusting Americans. I love that.
Yeah, he debuted in 1983, retired in 2013. Alex, is it more of just how long he has been around and some of the stuff he's been able to accomplish that gets him a deserving spot here?
He's probably one of the best promos in the business as a heel, period. He has, like, his most recent theme entrance is probably one of the best evil sounding things I've ever heard. The only thing that really held him back probably from going higher on the list is his substance issues that he's had.
Yeah.
That it sort of probably, like, he plateaued too many times because he was holding himself back. And then by the time he got perfect at that gimmick, like, he already had back problems, he had all this other stuff, and he should have probably had another 5 years or so in the business. It's just he hit that point. Now he's perfect as, like, a mentor, trainer, GM, whatever they want to call him down there at the Performance Center.
All right, so William Regal starts off with number 100, tied with William Regal at number 99. It's interesting because we had already talked about him, at least name-dropped him a little bit earlier. He went by a couple different names, but most of you would recognize him as the aforementioned Haku. Meng, King Tonga, King Haku, Tama Tonga, whatever you want to call him. Most people will probably know him as either Ming or Haku. Trained by the Giant Baba, debuted in 1978. Spent time in the World Wrestling Federation from 1986 to around 92 as part of the Islanders, the Colossal Connection, etc. Spent a couple years in Japan and Mexico. Then he went into WCW, where we saw him in the Faces of Fear / Dungeon of Doom. Came back to the WWF for a year or so, and then since then has been either independent or New Japan Wrestling. He has a lot of accomplishments. I'm not going to list them all, but he was a WCW Hardcore Champion one time and WWF Tag Team Champion one time with Andre the Giant, as well as a whole bunch of other things. But I'll start with TV's Mr. Neil again. What do you think of Ming or Haku coming in, and is he deserving of this spot here at a 99 or 100, however you want to judge it?
That's about where I'd put him. He does deserve to be on the list. I have two distinct memories of Haku, both being the King Haku, as they would refer to him as on WrestleCrap, does not come with Crown is Illustrated. And people know that joke. And also Ming in WCW, where he had the dreaded Tongan death grip. That was basically like the killer move. Like, nobody got up from that except for, of course, Goldberg. But that was like the big deadly move. They never did anything with him, though. He never really won anything except for like the Hardcore Championship, and then he left with it. But he was a great wrestler.
Alex, what do you think of Ming or Haku? Which one do you know him better as?
It's interchangeable. I think with him, the legends of him behind the scenes are probably what even puts him on the list, because he was a serviceable wrestler, if you want to say that. But he was somebody that you'd always want there because he looked menacing. And like, I think he's in his 60s now, and when he does show up to wrestle with his sons in New Japan, he's still scary.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, he's 60 right now, and he has 3 sons. He has 4 children, but I believe 3 sons that are wrestling in New Japan. And I'm going to, let's see, Tanga Loa, Tama Tonga, and I'm going to say the last one wrong, but Hikuleo.
Well, I know Tonga is the island they're from too, and it's like it means I guess the people or something. One of those sorts of. So it can be a name, and it can be a place, and it can be a whole bunch of stuff. I think what held him back is the language barrier. He never really mastered the English language.
Right. So a lot of times you did see managers or mouthpieces put with him to help him out because he wasn't going to speak a lot. But they did use that in a way to his advantages, making him seem like a more intimidating person to face because you didn't, they almost portrayed him as like this animal or this beast or something like that. So it was kind of an interesting way. And I don't remember all of the different people that they put with him as far as I want to say Bobby Heenan at one point. But they did stick a lot of different managers with him.
Like he was basically the prototype for what they did with Umaga later on.
Yeah. Anybody else thoughts on Haku at number 99?
It's good to see him still out there as like an ambassador, I guess. So I mean, it's cool that the legend of the Tonga lives on with like Bullet Club and stuff like that too. So that stuff's interesting.
Another thing we should be doing is we should be, promoting this as a drinking game. So far, we've had two people that are both living. Maybe every time we talk about somebody that's not with us anymore, somebody should have to do a shot or a drink or something. I don't know. Be creative on your own, guys, because that's where
we won't make it through.
Yeah, exactly. That's where we're going next.
This beer, so yeah.
With our number 98 person, we are going to be talking about someone who unfortunately is not with us anymore. He debuted in 1979, retired in 2013. I don't think many people knew him as a character named Who, but you probably did know him as a character named the Anvil. Jim the Anvil Neidhart comes in at number 98. He was with the WWF from around 1985 to 92. Spent some time in ECW, New Japan, WCW, came back to WWF, went back to WCW. So he was jumping all around, even spent a little... had a coffee break at TNA, I believe. So Jim the Anvil Neidhart, most people are going to remember him for the Hart Foundation and for his tag team with Bret the Hitman Hart. He had a lot of accomplishments. Most of them are going to be tag related. He was a two-time WWF tag champion. He was also inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame this year, 2019. He had a feud of the year in 1997 with the Hart Foundation versus Stone Cold Steve Austin. He's also in the Canadian Wrestling Hall of Fame, so a lot of accolades here. Legends Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame, New England Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame. I don't know how many Hall of Fames there are for wrestlers, but apparently quite a few. Matthew, what do you think of the Anvil? Is he deserving, and is 98 a good spot for him?
I'm sure Alex can probably wax more poetic on the Anvil in terms of his accomplishments north of the border. I know him as part of the Hart Foundation and the new Hart Foundation later on, especially with the Stone Cold feud and everything. I know him and it's great to see. I mean, I feel like he was probably a great singles wrestler when he did wrestle single, but you always remember him from the Hart Foundation. And it's going to be interesting to see who else gets on the list, maybe just based on tag team accomplishments, because that's really what you know him for. You know him for the goatee, you know him for the glasses, and you know him for the you know him for the
absolutely.
So, it's great.
I don't want to leave out he was also in the Stampede Wrestling Hall of Fame. Interesting looking at all of his different tag championships along the way, because he basically was a tag wrestler for most of his career, but not all with Bret Hart. He had tag team championship gold with the likes of Crusher Khrushchev, the Blue Meanie, Butch Reed, Greg Valentine, Hercules Ayala, and Mr. Hito. So he had a lot of different tag belts with different people. Alex, what do you think of Jim the Anvil Neidhart?
It's blasphemous, but I don't remember ever seeing him wrestle once. So it's like one of the Canadians is just like, oh yeah, or is he Canadian even, or did he marry into? I think he might be a transplant. I don't think he's Canadian.
My God,
He is
was in it
born
for
in
the- he was in it
California.
for the
See?
medical insurance.
See, I knew my spidey sense was tingling, and it was like he's not really Canadian, so I don't have to care.
Yeah,
Right?
build from Reno, Nevada, or who knows where when he was the Who. But from actually California, obviously has a famous daughter in the wrestling business. TV's Mr. Neal, what do you think? I know you probably saw a little bit of him in the Hart Foundation growing up.
Oh, I love the Anvil. Yeah, I do remember him because he was teamed with Brett. But he did stick around for a little while after the Hart Foundation split up. He was with he initially teamed with Owen. If you remember, he was the one who brought in the taxi cab parachute pants that Owen was known for later on, and even Coco Beware went after Anvil left for whatever reason. Yeah, he was the originator of that style. Thank you, Anvil, for that. But yeah, funny guy, always tugging on the beard, always cackling, and he was the talker before Brett really got. Well, Brett never did get good at talking, but while Brett just stood there looking cool, it was up to Anvil to say funny things. So yeah, I really loved him.
Anybody else? Any other thoughts on Jim the Anvil Neidhart? All right, let's move on then to our number 97 spot. We're going to have a first. Jim Neidhart might not have technically been from Canada, but our next person is... She debuted in 2000 and retired in 2019. It is also our first female wrestler on the list. We're going with a Patricia Ann Strategius. I don't know if that's how you say her last name or not, but most people know her as Trish Stratus.
It's time to rock and roll. This time I'm in control. Right now I own the streets. I got the keys to the city. That's 'cause I get down. Time to rock and roll.
And she spent some time in TNA in 2000, and then obviously made her way to the WWE. Quite a few accomplishments as well. WWE Hardcore Champion 1 time, Women's Champion 7 times, inducted into the Hall of Fame in 2013, Diva of the Decade in 2003. We won't talk about what the Wrestling Observer said, but she was also part of the worst worked match of the year. Bradshaw, Christopher Nowinski, and Jackie Gata.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, boy.
PWI, Pro Wrestling Illustrated, Woman of the Year in 2002, 2003, 2005, and 2006. Trish Stratus, our first female. TV's Mr. Neal, what do you think?
Trish Stratus, I remember she started out with... I believe she was the manager of Test and Albert and was not very good on the mic, but she got really good later on. She was, I remember very vividly, she was in one of the very first female main events that I remember actually being good, her versus Lita in the main event of Raw. God, I don't remember what year that was, but that was outstanding. Wasn't around all that long, if I remember correctly. Her initial run was maybe like what? 4 or 5 years.
2001 is when she was doing the thing with Test and Albert and Val Venus. She was a manager for Val Venus. And yeah, that was the beginning part.
Yeah, I don't remember her being around that long wrestling. I think she retired like...
Says she semi-retired in 2005, 2006.
Yeah, that's what I remember. Yeah, so she wasn't around that long, but yeah, she was pretty good.
Alex, what do you think? Is she deserving to be one of the females that makes the list?
Yeah, she should probably be higher because she found a way to mix herself in right at the tail end of that Attitude Era when everything was going a mile a minute, and I don't know, found a way to sort of blend the really crappy women's stuff that they were doing with actual wrestling. When she came back now, she was okay. Like when she came back, this is not my comment. My brother was watching with me and he's like, "Who's the ghoul?" What? Oh yeah, she's had a little too much work done, but let's put that aside. Like I think the work speaks for itself, because if somebody says, "Hey, name other than this new women's revolution, name a women wrestler that was good," you're probably going to have her in like the top 3 or 4 names said, right? So, pretty much of any times. So she probably should have been a little higher.
Okay, I can see that. Matthew, what do you think? You agree or disagree that she should be higher?
It's weird. I'm going to be interested to see what other female wrestlers make it above her, because out of that whole decade, 2000 to 2010, yeah, she was a very important piece of at least giving women wrestling some sort of like reputable, like, thing in the industry. Because then you have the whole like the diva thing, which was just kind of laughable. Where yeah, it was a bunch of just women on reality shows and everything. Whereas she wrestled, Lita wrestled very well too, and I mean, I'm sure we'll be talking about Lita later on down the line. We should be. I hope that we will be. But her, we'll see what happens with that. Everybody likes to have sex in public too, so we'll get to that as well. But I think her going from valet, because you don't always see like valets go into wrestling. I mean, yeah, you saw Sable kind of do it a little bit, but I think she was the one that fully crossed over and was made such a huge part of that tail end of the Attitude Era into the new era, whatever was after that. So I like her. I like her right around here. Could she have been a little bit higher? Maybe, but I mean, I'm glad she's at least in the discussion of the top 100 of all time, or at least based on other people's lists. So that's pretty cool.
Right.
Yeah, and say what you will about her. Talking about Ghoul, look at Sable. She looks like the Crypt Keeper that pulled the skin too tight.
Yeah, there's some rough looking, and I don't know. It's
there's a point where it's like it's not even being mean. It's just like you should not be on TV because you will scare children.
Yeah, that's the new Attitude Era right there.
Oh my, Alex, I mentioned that this was the first Canadian on our list. What's the over and under on how many Canadians we're going to get?
Well, it depends. There's been a fair amount of influx into the major companies over the past 20 years or so. I don't know if you've tabulated the numbers on that, but
I sure haven't.
It could be about a quarter of them. It could be anywhere from 20 to 40%.
All right,
because there may not be as nearly as many of them, like in general in the business, but a lot of the ones that make it in end up becoming memorable.
Yes.
Yeah. All right, and there's one big family that produced a lot of them too as well up there. So we'll have to see if that comes close. 20-25% might be up there. Let's go to our first asterisks on our list. I'm saying that because I'm not convinced that everybody voted for the same person, but they all. We have two different people that have been in the wrestling business that shared the same name, so that kind of throws a wrench in the mix. But I'm assuming that we're voting on the male version of this name. So next up is
I think I know who it is.
going to be someone who debuted in 1932 and retired in 1962. Spent 30 years in the wrestling business, was an AWA World Heavyweight Champion, was an NWA Southern Heavyweight Champion, was in the Professional Wrestling Hall of Fame in 2002, Stampede Wrestling Hall of Fame, and in the WWE Hall of Fame 2010. I can't help but feel that his numbers might be inflated because there might have been a few votes thrown into the female version of Gorgeous George. But Gorgeous George is coming in next. I guess our first classic wrestler. Alex, what do you think? Was everybody voting for the man from the 30s through the 60s, or was Macho
I don't think
Man?
there's not a single vote for Gorgeous George the female.
Okay,
really, like Gorgeous George the female do anything at all?
I mean, she was with Macho Man.
With Macho Man, did she do anything in the ring?
I don't know.
Exactly. Does anybody remember who that person is other than having that name?
I will admit that I had a photo of her that was on a wall.
That's okay, sure.
Was this Macho Man WCW Gorgeous?
Probably.
Okay,
Yes.
I see. That proves that I know nothing about wrestling.
Exactly. Like, the Gorgeous George one, and again, it's another thing where none of us would have ever seen Gorgeous George wrestle.
Correct.
The male, like ever. It's just no.
Yeah.
In fact, most of our parents probably never did either.
No.
It's
Notably, though, he was the first one that had Pomp and Circumstance as his theme.
Yeah, I think it's more hearsay of what we heard, because I don't even know if there's that many matches that exist. And if we did watch matches from back then, the matches from back then wouldn't look good. And not just the visual quality, just they were just a bunch of holds and stuff. It was meant to simulate like what you'd see at a college wrestling meet, only this person brought out pretty much the first wrestling character, other than just like the freak show I'm a strong man sort of thing. this was the first person to have an actual gimmick.
Mhm. Apparently had a long feud with somebody named Whipper Billy Watson.
That's Canadian.
Also had a battle with Luthez in Chicago that was publicized. Bruno Sammartino. So a lot of the classics he probably came into contact with at some point along the way. Matthew, what do you think of somebody from back in the way back day making our list?
I mean, yeah, considering none of us have we've probably never seen not even replays of him wrestling, but did he also come out with the mirror? Was he would come out with a mirror and look at the mirror?
The
Did he do
mirror,
that
the
too?
robe had makeup
Yes,
on,
the
everything.
crown, makeup, yes. So that to me, I mean, I'm glad the old, I guess you can call it the golden age of wrestling is kind of making its, or classic age of wrestling is making its presence known now too. And you think of what he did to, you know, make way for all the other wrestlers down the line too. I mean, Pomp and Circumstance, Macho Man's theme, when he was wrestling too. So I'm glad that we're getting a little love. I'm glad that we're getting a little diverse crowd with people hopefully not thinking this was the female escort for Macho Man at some point, but who knows at this point. And I also I've always been intrigued by the old wrestling where it was very, very important to keep your face and heel and keep your gimmick as realistic as possible. You think of people like Classy Freddie Blassie, where people would try and stab him in public. I don't think they were trying to stab Gorgeous George and stuff like that, but I'm sure the boos are real and the hate was
I
real.
wouldn't be surprised because I think Gorgeous George was the first wrestler to be on televised anything, really, like in the days when it was only live TV. Basically, for anybody that's listening that has never seen Gorgeous George was basically like Liberace as a wrestler.
Yeah. I think another thing that just based on reading and whatnot, obviously, since, like you guys said, we haven't seen a lot of his matches or anything like that, but is more of the cultural impact too. Just in his quick synopsis here online, talking about how Muhammad Ali and James Brown said that they got their flamboyant self-promotion approach from George, or at least was influenced by that. Bob Dylan said meeting George changed his life. People were talking about how he was kind of the bad, the bad guy, but the outrageous, flamboyant talker. So it might have been one of the first that was really a mic star, I guess you could say, as it's been good on the mic and kind of where that all originated from. There also apparently is a 1978 film called The One and Only, starring Henry Winkler, that is somewhat based on his career. So a lot of cultural reaches as well. Anybody else, any comments on whether he's deserving or not deserving of top 100?
Just for
We're
that,
good with him being there. Yeah. All right. So let's move from way back in the day to modern day. We're going to have somebody that is currently wrestling show up right now. Well, currently, as far as I believe she's still on the roster. I don't know when the last time I saw her wrestle, though. Next up on our list is none other than cousin of Dwayne Johnson, Nia Jax. Coming in here, NXT was where she began her career. Obviously, has been called up since then. Also had ring names of Lena and Zeta. Billed from San Diego, California. And I don't need to say too much. Everybody that's listening should at least be familiar with Nia Jax, I guess. So, TV's Mr. Neal, what do you think of another female reaching this and Nia Jax being higher than Trish Stratus?
I don't have much to say. I'm not terribly familiar with her, but great to see another female wrestler on the list.
Okay, Alex, what do you think?
She's kind of not good. Probably shouldn't be on the list.
Oh, you're being very nice, Alex. What a kind soul.
But I mean, not better than Trish. Hurts people left and right, and kind of just doesn't have any charisma. So I'm just kind of surprised. It's like she's there because they need a monster.
Yeah, she is a one-time Raw Women's Champion. Also was named the PWI Rookie of the Year in 2016. Matthew, is this a sign of bias, maybe more in favor of people who are wrestling today, or is this more of an exception?
Yeah, I mean, if I'm going to be honest, I feel like this is a little bit more of a recency bias type thing. People know Nia Jax. She is a monster, a monstrous, woman in the ring, But to Alex's point, if we're going on the technique aspect, yeah, she has been known to either break people's faces, notably the man at this point, Becky Lynch. And just overall, like you hear the stories about her just being sloppy. But I mean, if we're not judging it on technique and we're just judging on people who know who that is, and she's become like the monster heel or the monster face, whatever you want to call her at this point. So I feel like this may be a little bit more of a recency bias, even though, yeah, I haven't really seen her on TV or heard about her a lot on TV lately. So
I think she's hurt again.
I might have made, or do we have the wrong bias? Is it not a recency bias? Is it a Samoan bias?
Oh, maybe. I mean, this is what the second Samoan on the list out of what we've gone through. What, about 7 wrestlers so far? I mean,
yeah, I think one thing to think about with her though is when I was putting together my list, I was thinking, what draws people? And she's not somebody that draws a viewer in. Like you don't pay to watch her. People paid to watch Trish.
Mm-hmm. I don't know.
Yeah,
I mean,
I don't know. I think that'd be the one we would have the most grief or hear the most grief about so far that we've revealed. I think everybody else, you can make a pretty good argument that they belong in the top 100. I'm not sure if you can with Nia Jax. But
what was the point difference between her and Trish Stratus, just for reference?
3 points.
Okay, that makes sense. Then it's probably that more people. There are going to be a lot of people on the list that people didn't know or didn't remember that much, so they didn't rank them as high.
Right. Yeah. Interesting with where we're going to next, because we've talked about if there would be, more people from WWF or more people from WCW or whatever company you're going to go with, New Japan, etc. This guy that's coming up next is literally like the poster child for every company, because I swear there is not a company that this guy has not wrestled for. He made his debut in 1988. Some people may have remembered him from back in the day as somebody called Johnny Polo, or maybe Scotty Flamingo, or Scotty the Body, or Scott Anthony, or maybe mostly just Raven. So WCW at the beginning of his career, after, so obviously some early independent stuff, WWF, ECW, back to WCW, back to WWF, back to ECW, over to TNA, independents. He has been everywhere. He's been different characters along the way. I think we can all agree that Raven is probably the one that he is most known for, but he spent time as a manager, or valet, I guess you could say, wrestler, tag team, hardcore stuff. So a lot of different accomplishments, obviously, in the just to get what people might know the most. He's spent some time as the WWF Hardcore Champion 27 times, to be exact. And then WCW Light Heavyweight Champion once, United States Heavyweight Champion once, and then 1 tag team reign with Perry Saturn. Let's start with TV's Mr. Neil. What do you think of Raven making our top 100?
Good spot for him. I got to know him pretty much in WCW when he came in after dropping the belt to oh my God, I can't remember who it was. But he dropped the ECW belt and came to WCW. And I didn't realize that he was Johnny Polo. It took me a while because Raven's kind of a chameleon. He changes his look, and sometimes you can't tell it's the same guy. He was very different as Johnny Polo. He didn't even wrestle. He was a manager.
Right.
So it was like, what? I didn't realize it was him.
Raven's Flock, that's when I first was introduced to him, and I had a friend that was absolutely obsessed with Raven and Raven's Flock, so he was huge on him. But yeah, and then it was funny going back and being like, wait, he was that guy? Alex, what do you think of Raven? Is he deserving of being in our top 100?
He deserves to be there because I guess he was the wrestling manifestation of the grunge movement, if that...
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Like, really? Now, interesting little story. Close friend of mine was like an underneath wrestler across Canada, and wrestled a bunch of times with Raven. And they became friends because Raven wanted him to show him how to rip anime DVDs on his laptop so he could watch them on the go.
Oh my god!
This is like 2003, 2004. So yeah, my friend has been sort of buddies with him because he showed him how to rip was it like Ninja Scroll and a bunch of other stuff that he had on the road.
He was a tag team champion with the likes of people like Stevie Richards, Tommy Dreamer, Mike Awesome, Hugh Morris. I'll say it with a space in between there. Somebody named Sexy Slim Goody. 3 guys named Top Gun, the Grappler, and Steve Dahl. And then Brian Christopher and Perry Saturn, like I mentioned before. Who else has thoughts? Matthew, did I give you a chance to sound off on Raven?
I mean, what I'll say is like, I knew, of course, like Neil said, I knew him from WCW and the Flock. I didn't really watch a lot of ECW until I think this was probably about 7th or 8th grade, where a camp counselor, when I was at camp, he brought in like a ECW videotape. I don't know if it was like November to Remember or something like that, and they had all types of crazy matches. And I remember seeing Raven there for the first time. And yeah, he was, like Alex said, like the embodiment of the grunge movement, and just kind of like angsty and whiny and like, what about me? What about Raven? And I was like, yeah, what about Raven? Yeah, you keep effing this guy over all the time and everything like that. Yeah, what about Raven? So it was just a different, he looked sloppy, but he wrestled well. He was a great wrestler, but he was unlike any other wrestler you had at the time. It wasn't the shaved body or wearing tights and trunks or anything very flamboyant. He would come out to essentially like a really awful version of Pearl Jam's Even Flow and everything, which was always funny to me too. So that was one of my most him and DDP's entrance theme to WCW always just gave me a laugh because I loved grunge music. So those 2 guys were awesome.
I remember way too often that my group of friends and I would have to quote the Raven Nevermore over and over again. So that was something. All right, let's move from Raven into someone from a few decades before that. He is still living. He was trained by the likes of Jack Briscoe and Bob Backlund and Eddie Graham and Hiro Matsuda. Debuted in 1976, almost had a career in football. Instead, was actually drafted by the New Orleans Saints, but failed to pass the physical for both the Saints and the Chiefs. So he went to wrestling instead, spent some time in the 80s at WWF. That's where probably most of us saw him, but did spend other time in NWA, WCW, Smoky Mountain Wrestling, and a few other independents. We are talking about Mr. Wonderful, Paul Orndorff. So he is coming in next on our list. Obviously, a huge, long career. He's in the University of Tampa Football Hall of Fame. So there we go, a different Hall of Fame. He was a Georgia Championship Wrestling heavyweight champion, a lot of different independent ones. And then he had a feud of the year in 1986, according to PWI, with Hulk Hogan, a match of the year before with Roddy Piper versus Hulk Hogan and Mr. T from WrestleMania. He was voted the most hated wrestler of the year in 1986, and is inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame in 2005. TV's Mr. Neal, do you have any recollection of Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff?
He was in the first ever main event of WrestleMania. It was him and Piper versus Hogan and Mr. T. I just remember him as being sort of the same archetype of what Ric Flair was, or like Greg the Hammer Valentine. The same archetype that came from Gorgeous George, which we already talked about. Don't have a lot of memories of him, unfortunately. I don't remember him being around all that long. He was in WCW before I started watching. I think he had some sort of injury that caused one of his arms to atrophy, and he basically retired about the time I started watching. So I don't remember a whole lot of him.
Did have a brief run in Mid-South, a tag team with Ted DiBiase. That would have been interesting to see back in the day. Also an NWA/WCW World Tag Team Champion 3 different times with the likes of Jimmy Snuka and Paul Roma twice. He was also WCW World Television Champion 1 time. Alex, what do you think of Mr. Wonderful and where he sits on the countdown?
I only ever saw a couple matches, like the aforementioned Mania ones. He's on this list for me simply because of that sweet, sweet mustache he's donning these days. You see that when he came back? Was it 2014 or 2015? Was that when was he in the Hall of Fame that year or something?
2005 was the WWE
wow.
Hall
Why
of
the heck did he
Fame.
come back? Was it Hogan's birthday or something? Well, he came back and he was sporting that gigantic mustache that would put like Sam Elliott to shame.
Oh yes, it was Hogan's birthday.
Okay, so that's really all I've ever seen of him. So I have no comment.
I'm not doing him justice with all the different Hall of Fames that he's been in either. Professional Wrestling Hall of Fame and Museum. There's NWA Hall of Fame. So there's a lot of Hall of Fames that he's in. So I'm going to take everybody's word for him because I didn't really have a chance to watch him too much, but I knew of him and I knew that he was kind of the era right before I started watching. So it was kind of more on reputation that I put him on my rankings. Matthew, any last comment on Mr. Wonderful?
I didn't really grow up watching him. Don't know a ton about him. I know him and Hogan feuded, but even at that point, I don't think I was really watching wrestling all that much. I guess to your point, if he was supposed to be like the Ric Flair, he was much more in shape, less flabby version of Ric Flair. So I'll give him that much, I guess. I don't know. I mean, aside from an atrophied arm, I think everything was wonderful about him. So
yeah, he seemed to be like if Ric Flair was more of a hillbilly and was in better shape. No, like
more of a hillbilly.
just the way he talks, dude. Dude.
Yeah,
but he had a good look, and I mean, he not overrated or anything. He's just unremarkable. I don't think he didn't really excel at any one thing. He was just well-rounded.
Yeah. Well, let's move on to somebody that I know all of you are going to be able to comment on because I know most of you have seen his matches, whether they be in the UFC or in the WWF. I know that doesn't give it away yet, though. There could be multiple people that I'm talking about, but I am talking about the original Ken Shamrock coming in here as the next entrant on our top 100. It's hard to go through all of his accomplishments because he had two different careers, a UFC career and a wrestling career. Wrestling Observer Feud of the Year, 2002 and 2006. It says Tito Ortiz, though, so I'm assuming that's talking about the UFC type. Most Improved Wrestler of the Year, 1997, according to PWI. In the WWE, he spent time as Intercontinental Champion one time, a Tag Team Champion one time with Big Boss Man, King of the Ring in 1998. And he was involved in the Intercontinental Championship Tournament in 1998. Ken Shamrock. Alex, what do you think?
The king of testosterone replacement, steroids, and from before UFC was tested. Oh, he's great. Like even when he would not be as memorable if he didn't go back to he flip-flopped between fighting and wrestling and fighting and wrestling, and he's coming back to TNA Impact, I think.
He's been there this year, I think.
No, like for their Bound for Glory, their big pay-per-view this year, he's going to be on it at like 53 or whatever age he is.
I mean, 55.
The last time he fought a guy, the guy died. So,
oh right,
yeah,
got a lot to live up to.
But he was one of the few guys that in the 90s blurred the lines, like that made you go, everybody's like, oh, wrestling's fake. Yeah, but Shamrock's real, like legit real. So it made you wonder how much of it is fake and how much of it is real. So he was good for that, and that's probably why they hired him, because they were having a crisis of image, and hiring somebody who was being all over the news for being the world's most dangerous man, for beating basically every martial art style you could imagine in the tournament multiple times. It was a smart move to have him.
Yeah. It was an interesting thing because it was obviously before UFC really got super popular and things of that nature. So I remember just being interested in the late 90s, seeing this guy come along, and he was a real fighter, and seeing how that kind of. And then we obviously got the likes of people like who was it, Dan Severn and Steve Blackman, and a couple other people that came in around that same time. But Shamrock was the one that seemed to have the most success out of all of that. Matthew, is he deserving of being in our top 100?
I think so, because I feel like he was one of the first like kind of big crossover stars that you had. You had the guy adding a an air of legitimacy to wrestling or wrestling, whatever you want to put it. So it was cool to see like this guy that was like, "Get out of my way," and he was kind of like, "You never knew." He snapped, and the way they would talk him up during the matches, and he also had one of the. I mean, people either love this match or don't. Either people love the match or hate the match, like the Lions Den match that he did with Owen Hart, where it was one of those weird matches during the pay-per-view where you had them going back and they were wrestling in a basement and basically just throwing themselves around the Stu Hart dungeon. What was it? A dungeon match? Is that what it was? It was something like that.
Yeah.
And it was interesting to have that match because nobody had ever done that, and again, nobody's ever done that again ever again. So it could have been one of those just weird, like the one of those stupid matches that they do now, the bamboo death match or something like that. Whatever, just those stupid matches. But it was cool to see this guy who, he was really actually a bad man who could kill you if you did something wrong. So it was cool in that era where they were looking for some legitimacy, or like, hey, how can we make this more real? Let's bring Ken Shamrock in to be weird. And and unfortunately, he never really knew how to talk on the mic. If he knew how to talk on the mic and do his fighting, he could have been way higher on the list, in my opinion.
He does now, and he got better as he went back into the pro fighting scene in the last 10 years or so. I guess that just comes with age. But one thing to consider too, like for the legitimacy factor, his finishing moves, like his ankle locks and toe holds and all that, those are moves that he used to become champion at UFC. So they were smart. They just ported over everything that worked in real life. So if they really wanted to, anybody go up by a tape and watch him use those moves on somebody for real and how painful it really is. And then just they transferred it to wrestling. So, and he predates, like you said, crossover. He predates Kurt Angle. He predates anybody that wasn't, a crossover star from football or basketball or something.
Right. And he wasn't just a UFC fighter. He was a highly successful UFC fighter. I mean, at one point he was, I think, 22-4. It did go downhill very quickly after that. We're talking about once he started doing more UFC fighting in the 2000s, because he went from a 22-4 record to a 28-17. So it was not very good towards the end, but definitely braving new ground when the WWE was searching for other ways to kind of entice people to watch their products. So let's move on from Ken Shamrock into our next person on the list. We're up into getting real close to the 150 point mark. This person beat Ken Shamrock by only 1 point though. So I guess votes matter here. And we're talking about somebody who enjoys the game of softball. I don't know if that gives it away to anybody, but debuted in 1987. I guess he retired in 2017, but that's being very generous. World Championship Wrestling at the beginning, World Wrestling in the WWF in 91, 92, went back to WCW, then went to USWA, then went back to WWF, then went to ECW, then went back to WCW as it was dying. We're talking about, what name do we want to use? Psycho Sid, Sid Vicious, Sid Justice, Sid, Lord Humongous at one point. That was early on. It's interesting here listening to the podcast with the various podcasts that Conrad Thompson does with either Eric Bischoff or Bruce Pritchard. They talk about how he was this part of the Skyscrapers back in WCW, which was interesting because they when they debuted, a lot of people were talking about which skyscraper was the better one and which one you wanted. Apparently it was Sid, because he was with a guy named Dan Spivey at the beginning. But it was eventually Mean Mark Callis was a part of that, which a lot of people would know as Undertaker. So interesting beginnings, some time with the Four Horsemen, obviously some very famous moments with the WWF. And I guess this goes into the discussion that I want to have with you guys right now is he had the size, he had the physique, he had the tenure as far as how long he was around. He had some championships, and we were talking about WCW US champion once, World Heavyweight twice, WWF World Heavyweight twice. But is this a situation where even though he had all that success and the body and everything else, where when we're making our list, we're also ranking other things like, I don't know, mic skills or the ability to talk or charisma or things of that nature, which he might have come up short in that department. I don't know. Matthew, what do you think about Sid, and is the 90s the right spot for him?
I mean, he's such a memorable character because he did switch names so much. And the Psycho Sid game and the entrance theme to me is like, it's seared in my brain whenever you would hear the literal Psycho music ripoff for it, and him come out twitching and being weird, and his time with Shawn Michaels and feuds with Hulk Hogan and things like that. So we had great feuds. He was set up in such a great way, and of course, we know that Vince McMahon loves a tall, sweaty, greasy, blonde man. So that's why you're pushed to the moon most of the time, I feel. But yeah, his mic skills were not good, but they're memorable because I think of things like, Botchamania, where he's literally a big part of things like that, where it's like, oh, we're live, pal. And he's like, let me do that again. It's like, no, you can't. So maybe people are just remembering things like that. But he was a pretty agile 7-footer in a time where you had your Andre the Giants, but then you didn't really have anybody who was like agile, who could move around the ring and things like that. So it was good to see him. And I mean, I don't want to bring up the whole leg injury thing, but that was also probably top one gruesome thing I've seen in the ring, outside of some other things, outside of people actually dying in the ring, of course, too.
Right.
So there's that. That was like, that was horrible. And
that other mic moment though with Nash and Hall.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. it's so
Half
good.
the brain.
Oh god, it's fantastic stuff, and he's a memorable big man, and he did have some good accolades aside from mic skills. He was a cool wrestler with good gimmicks and good things about him. So
I remember. I remember going to, we used to go to all the wrestling events whenever they would come to our arena, which they did quite often, actually. I got to see quite a bit of WCW and WWF. I remember when he was doing the Psycho Sid persona, that it was one of the first times that instead of, in just random seats in the arena, that we actually had aisle seats, and we were literally on the aisle as they were, going down the walkway. And he would do this thing where he would stop and just stare like a crazy madman into nothingness. This dude, though, he stopped in front of us. Like it was our row, it was our seat, and he's just staring, and we're all just like, what the fuck is this?
What's wrong with this guy?
Like, this guy is crazy. And and it's also one of those things where, hey, these guys look big on TV. They look real big in person. And he is one of the biggest guys I've ever seen in my life, and he was staring right at us, right through us. I don't even know. I don't think his eyes were working or his brain was working. I don't know, but definitely memorable. It seems like somebody that, though, just never quite lived up to the potential that he should have had, at least according to what you think based on the eye test and things of that nature. But is a 90s a good spot for him, Neil?
I think so. He's one of those guys. Yeah, it just seems like lost potential is the story of Sid Vicious. Just he always seemed to be like taking time off for softball or getting over injuries or whatever. Like anytime he started to gain momentum, he was gone. And it was like twice in his initial WWF run. He was not around all that long in that early 90s spot when he was Sid Justice. He was around for a couple of months, and then he did something with his arm, and then he was around for a couple of other months, and he was suspended or something.
Right.
And I remember something about that Royal Rumble pay-per-view where he throws Hogan out of the ring perfectly within the rules to do so, and Hogan threw a big hissy fit. I thought Hogan was turning heel. I honestly did. I was like, well, clearly Hogan's the one being the big baby here, but no, they remember like later on TV when they replayed it, they changed the audio so that the audience was actually cheering Hogan, which they definitely were not at the live pay-per-view. I so wanted that feud to go the other way where Vicious was Sid Vicious was the good guy.
Right.
But that leg injury is the reason now that, like, if anyone falls like a half a foot, I flinch just because I'm like, it scarred me for life.
He had everything going for him but loyalty and bone density.
Yeah. basically. He also represented a time where the WWF was trying to find that replacement for, the Hogans and the Macho Mans or someone to join that, and they just weren't having luck with anybody because they tried Warrior, and it was somewhat successful, I guess, for a little bit, but they were trying all these different people, Sid being one of them, and it just never was working out, and it kind of led to a little bit of a lull before we kind of got into those Bret Hart and, Shawn Michaels, Steve Austin type era. But Alex, any last thoughts on Sid?
I remember getting like a multi-generation VHS tape that was taped from tape to tape to tape of like wrestling injuries. And I remember playing that and going, "Hey mom, take a look at this," and then and then being screamed at for like 30 minutes while because I left it on the screen. And then I remember taking a screenshot in the early days of the internet, and a screenshot of like where it's like you can see it, right? The whole like the worst shot ever. And I made that the background of my parents' computer and then locked it.
Oh, nice. Oh, Lord. All right. So Sid is I believe that's 91 if I'm keeping track right here. So we have one more member in the 90s, and we are going to go to someone who is probably more known, or at least most known early on for his time in ECW. He was known at one point as somebody named Kid Crush. Does anybody know who that is? How about the Tasmanian Devil? The Tasmaniac? We're talking about Taz. Debuted in 1987, retired in 2002, spent a lot of time in ECW, sometime in the WWF, and then a little bit of time in TNA. Most of his accomplishments are going to be ECW World Heavyweight Champion twice, World Television Champion twice. He's had three different tag championships with the likes of Kevin Sullivan and Sabu. He was the third ECW Triple Crown champion. PWI actually ranked him number 10 of the 500 best single wrestlers in 1999. And then in the WWF, he had a hardcore champion 3 times and a tag team champion 1 time with Spike Dudley. Some other, I guess, maybe not so nice accolades: Wrestling Observer newsletter, worst gimmick in 2013 for Aces and Eights, worst television announcer in 2013. So that's a little harsh, I think. But TV's Mr. Neal, do you remember seeing anything about Taz when you were watching wrestling?
Set the pigeons loose. I know him mostly from WWF when he joined, because I never really watched WCW, although I do know that he's part of a really interesting piece of trivia that he is represents one of the very few times that a legit WWF wrestler wrestled a WCW wrestler in an ECW ring. When he took on Mike Awesome to win the ECW title.
Right.
That was an interesting thing that happened. I know him a lot, probably mostly for his announcing work, which is not really that spectacular. He's no Jerry Lawler, I'll say that.
I just remember him as being the man with no neck. But Alex, what do you think about Taz? And he's the last person here in our 90s.
Never saw him wrestle, never heard him announce. I've only heard of him as a radio personality.
Fair enough. Matthew Stewart, what do you think?
Don't really have. I mean, he was pretty awful when it came to announcing. He just came up as this like obnoxious like New Yorker guy, like, I can't believe it. What the hell is this guy doing here? That type of thing. But looking back at his like old stuff from ECW, which I love, the old mid '90s to late '90s ECW. I think it's awesome. And he had a look about him like everybody else in ECW, about just looking like a scary dude. Like, this guy will kill you and choke you out, basically. And he kind of became that first wrestler that was like almost like a shoot wrestler in a lot of ways, where he'll come out, he'll wrestle you in a kind of great wrestling thing, but he can also have the ability to literally kill you if you wanted to. So I always liked that. But then when he became like a goofball announcer, and then the Aces and Eight thing was just not working. But I don't think a lot of stuff worked on TNA anyway. So that's what I'll have to say about that.
And I think another interesting thing to think about right now might be a good time to ask. I don't know which one of you guys watched the most ECW back in the day, but we've already had Raven and we have already now had Taz. What does that say for the likelihood of, is there anybody else from ECW that was mainly ECW? I'm not talking about people that also spent a crap ton of time in WWF, but, we had the likes of people that you've mentioned already, Tommy Dreamer, Mike Awesome. I'm thinking even, I guess
Rob
maybe
Van Dam.
Barry Saturn, Rob Van Dam might be a good one that we would probably hope to see. But how many more ECW guys will we see in this countdown, or are we almost to the end?
I'd be surprised if Sandman shows up, but it's an interesting gimmick.
It will be.
Douglas might be there.
Okay, yeah, I can see
I
that.
can see Shane Douglas.
Anybody? Well, I guess we can't count like Mick Foley or Jericho where they got their starts there, right? So
Like
Yeah,
Terry
I know.
Funk or something like that, maybe.
yeah. Well, and Funk will probably be more known for everything else.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking people from that era,
Yeah,
that
and then we're
had,
talking original ECW, so no like CM Punk will be there,
Does
but
someone
he's from
like-
the
does-
new ECW, right? So
Does a
Yeah.
Mike Awesome or Tommy Dreamer? Are they the
Dreamer
type
will
that
be
would-
there. Yeah, he'll be
Dreamer,
there.
I think, yeah.
Anybody else? I mean, the Dudleys.
New Jack.
New Jack. Well,
New Jack will,
we
New
have to
Jack
put
will
him
come
there.
and kill us if he's not on this list.
He'll tase us and throw us off a 50-foot scaffold if we don't put him up on the list somewhere.
Yeah.
I don't. A lot of them died from drugs really young before we were able to actually watch them, right? So
Right.
Yeah.
there won't be a whole ton of them. I don't think any women or any of the valets really.
No.
No.
And I don't think like because I don't
Well, when
think
you bring
was,
up the Dudleys,
was
do you
Candido and
still-
Sonny there at the very beginning, or they'd already no, they were at Smoky Mountain.
Coffee. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, so as far as like Rhino, probably.
Maybe.
I think so.
Yeah.
All right. We'll have to wait and see how many ECW stars we still see in the rest of the countdown. But now we're heading into our 80s with our 89th person on the list. We just talked about ECW. Let's talk about another company. Let's see how many homegrown TNA people we're going to see. We got one of them right now. I'm talking about the bias continues for people that have anything to do with Samoa. He's from California, but it's Samoa Joe. And he made his debut in 1999, also known as King Joe. Spent a ton of time in TNA before obviously making the transition over to the WWF, as some of you may know. A lot of accolades there. Most outstanding wrestlers, according to the Wrestling Observer newsletter in 2005. NXT Championship twice. He had a Dusty Rhodes Tag Team Classic win with Finn Balor. U.S. champion 2 times, has not got any of the main gold yet in WWF, but had a ton of it in TNA. I think he held almost every belt you could get in TNA at some point.
He was the only person to headline a pay-per-view at TNA that did over 100,000 buys.
There you go. So Samoa Joe at 89. Alex, what do you think?
It should probably be a little higher. Again, it's a case of people not having eyes on him, I think, for so long, because Ring of Honor was really nothing until the last 4 or 5 years, and it's kind of nothing nowadays too. Now that all the talent's been mined, but there was that period from 04 to maybe 2013, 2014, where it was basically TNA was basically him, AJ, and a couple other homegrown people that were tearing it up, and like the matches. There was about a 5-year period where matches at TNA were significantly better than anything else in the States, and nobody was watching it.
He was voted PWI's most popular wrestler of the year in 2006. He was ranked number 4 on their top 500 wrestlers list in both 2006 and 2008. And I got to read this one. CBS Sports Smack Talker of the Year in 2018. I didn't know that was a thing, but apparently it is. Matthew, what do you think of Samoa Joe here at number 89?
Okay. And I will strike from the record that, this is like the one thing that they've done right, like just Impact Wrestling and TNA in general. They're like AJ Styles and Samoa Joe's feud was always compelling, and 2 guys that just would do anything in the ring. And the wrestling was compelling, the storytelling was compelling. And just Joe just being an intense guy. And it sucks now because I really feel like they've really cut his nuts off wrestling wise. I feel with the WWF, he can still talk. And this guy, you wouldn't take him for a big talker or like great on the mic, but I feel like when you hear him talk now or cutting promos, it's scary to hear him talk. And I mean that in a good way, where I feel like, oh my God, this guy's going to come to my house or come to AJ Styles' house and kill his family. And to do something like that and make it feel real in a landscape of just like, people saying weird things and not really making good on threats. I love the way he talks. His performance, I think, has just been hampered by, when you put somebody, almost kill them in the ring, I guess you have to kind of take some of their weapons away from them too. But overall, I mean, I love Samoa Joe, and his theme. Everybody's like, Joe, Joe, Joe. That's awesome. And I'm a big rap fan, so I love Pharoah Monch. So it sounds like, a Pharoah Monch song too. So
or just people cheering, Joe's gonna kill you. Like,
yes, because he could.
That goes back to like Ring of Honor, like 03, 04.
Mm-hmm.
And it, surprising, as much as people really didn't watch a ton of his work beforehand, when he showed up, everybody, they was smart to put him at NXT first, because everybody watching NXT was watching all the other stuff too.
Yeah, they were the wrestling fan. They were watching the indie stuff. They wanted the guy, probably the biggest indie guy they could have gotten, go with NXT right away.
Also had a big feud with Kurt Angle. Mr. Neal, did you have any exposure to Samoa Joe?
Not a whole lot. I do like his look. He's got this really big, mean, tough guy look to him. He's really awesome. He does one of my favorite things ever in the ring. He, whenever somebody flips off the top rope, like does a moonsault or something, instead of just standing there and taking it, he'll just casually walk to the side and let them land on the ground. I love it every time he does it.
Nice.
Yeah, I love that.
And he moves like a cannonball.
Yeah.
That's a good description. I like that. Going from someone that's in the game currently to another one from the past that we're not going to probably be able to speak too much about his matches, but for 88, we're going to someone who debuted in 1949 and retired the year I was born in 1981. We are talking about someone that probably is on this list not just for his wrestling career, but maybe also as a promoter. And we're going to Vern Gagne here at number 88. Minnesota guy who had a football career, got drafted by the Chicago Bears at one point, and then obviously he had his company there. His son Greg did some wrestling, so a lot of NWA, AWA, etc. He was inducted into the kind of a odd moment where he's inducted in the WWE Hall of Fame, even though Vince is the one that put him out of business. In 2006, he was also WCW Hall of Fame in 1993. So we have an old guy here. We had Gorgeous George earlier. Now we have Vern Gagne. Alex, what do you think?
Well, he ran one of maybe 2 or 3 promotions that were surviving against WWF when they were doing their big expansion of, hey, here's some money because we're going to take your stuff anyway. Expansion in the 80s. Like he had a little more business savvy and held on to some of the people. Like if you look, the entire like WrestleMania, rock and wrestling, like that whole push, it's just he poached Vince McMahon poached like 50% of his roster, and they were all like Hogan oh geez, why am I drawing a blank? With Mean Gene and like other people, like they were all his crew. Even some of the television, like behind the scenes, the cameramen, like he poached so many people because their product was at the time, like if you look at it now, it doesn't hold up, but if you look at WWF from like 84 to 87, the entire production is a copy of what they were doing at AWA in the late 70s.
Yeah, in AWA, he had feuds with Gene Kaniski, Fritz von Erich, Dr. X, The Crusher, Ray Stevens, Mad Dog Vachon, Larry Henning, Nick Bockwinkel, etc. Here's something I didn't know about the guy. When he was like 83, he killed a guy.
Yeah.
There's a story here about him. He was like 80 in his mid 80s, and he killed a 97-year-old.
I didn't know about that. With his bare hands or with a gun?
Yes, no, with his bare hands.
Body slammed some guy at an old folks home or something.
Yeah, he basically hurled some guy to the floor. And then
I'm laughing. It's horrible, but I'm still going to laugh.
It says it wasn't a body slam, but it might as well have been, because I guess he broke the guy's hips and stuff. I don't know.
He really wanted that yogurt.
So I think he was probably one of the most notable owners/promoters, I guess, or whatever you want to call it, that Vince was going up against. I mean, you could probably about a half dozen of them that he was that Vince was doing battle with, and he's one of the main ones. So
he was the only independent one that held out, like because like Jim Crockett Promotions merged with a few, like you had a few mergers, and then what turned into WCW to compete against him, but he was the only singular territory that was able to hold out.
Right. But then also, like we said, had a pretty extensive wrestling career as well. So obviously, I think deserving of a spot somewhere in this top 100. I don't have a problem with the 80s being where he falls. Let's go to the next one, a little bit more recent, but definitely not modern. We're going to go to somebody who hopefully a few of us got to see towards the end of his career. He debuted in 1977 and retired in 1993. Some of his names included Stagger Lee, Big Daddy Ritter, Leroy Rochester, but probably most known for the name Junkyard Dog. Sylvester Ritter, Junkyard Dog, JYD.
Well, I started this dance in my neighborhood. Now everybody's doing it because it feels so good. All you need is a partner that know how to move, and the rest is real easy.
Obviously spent most of the time that we would know him in the WWF. That was in the mid to late 80s, but also had some time in the WCW, the NWA, NWA Mid-South with Bill Watts, another promoter that we could have talked about, I guess, a little bit ago. So accolades as far as WCW, he was the world 6-man tag team champion with Ricky Morton and Tommy Rich. WWF just basically never had a belt, but it was inducted into the Hall of Fame in 2004. He was named as the Feud of the Year in 1982 with Ted DiBiase, also the Worst Feud of the Year in 1990 with Ric Flair, and the Worst Tag Team in 1986 with George Steele. So that's a whole bunch of worst stuff. PWI named him the Inspirational Wrestler of the Year in 1980. I don't know what the criteria for that is. And the Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame inducted him in 2012. So some good, some bad there. Junkyard Dog, TV's Mr. Neal, do you remember watching him at all, or do you think he's worthy top 100?
Vaguely. I'm not sure if he belongs in the top 100. I don't remember being that great of a wrestler. I do know that he was very popular at the time. He was a big-time babyface, just way over with the crowd. They just saw him as like the ultimate underdog or something. I don't know. He kind of had like the working man sort of gimmick, similar to like a Dusty Rhodes or something like that. But don't remember a whole lot about him. He was not around very long when I started watching back in the late 80s.
Yeah, and died of a car accident in 1998. Here's a quick note. He actually he beat Mean Mark Callis, aka The Undertaker, once in 39 seconds.
Oh my God!
In 1990. So I guess that's a claim to fame. Alex, what do you think of Junkyard Dog?
I only know him from the cartoon. Like seriously, but I know reading about him and listening about him. The big deal, he was more of a territory thing. Like the WWF made him big because he was already sort of known. He was known as one of the first guys that sort of broke down like racial barriers, and that he was, from, I forget which territory he was in, but he was the most popular babyface in the territory at a time when racial tensions were still fairly high, but it didn't matter what color you were, you loved him. So I think that's what Vince saw and was like, hey, he is super huge down there, in what it was some southern state.
Mid-South.
Okay, yeah. Okay. And then they're like, well, we can capitalize on that because everybody likes him. So he was pushed to the moon. I don't remember ever seeing a match of his. I remember his entrance. He would come into Another One Bites the Dust. Into the ring, and it was like back when nobody had music.
Right. He had a big feud with Ted DiBiase in the Mid-South, as well as a few other people. Matthew, what do you think of Junkyard Dog, and is he top 100 worthy?
I mean, if you're going to say top 100, mainly said for breaking down some barriers of, because the only like African American wrestlers I saw were probably him, probably Tony Atlas. Those like the only two guys I remember even maybe seeing a little bit in that late 70s, mid 70s to the 80s. And he would come out, he'd come out with the white trunks and, you know, the big chain around his neck and everything like that. So he was like a junkyard dog off the chain. And yeah, he had that Dusty Rhodes kind of swagger to him, like kind of dance in the ring a little bit, kind of spastic. But yeah, he was like the working, he was kind of the, you know, I don't want to say, he was kind of like the Black Dusty Rhodes in a lot of ways. You know, he was an underdog and, you know, no pun intended, of course, underdog. But, you know, it was, I don't remember seeing him wrestle a lot. I remember his white trunk, his chain around his neck. That's really all I remember about the Junkyard Dog, to be honest with you.
All right. Well, let's move on then to the next person on our list, which is going to be interesting because it's kind of going back into that conversation where we have to talk about if tag teams are worthy, if they had a big enough singles career that they're going to be mentioned, or is their tag team partner going to be mentioned, or just them? You guys all know this one, though, that I'm going to be talking about. He went under a couple different names, mainly stuff like Brian Armstrong, The Dark Secret, the Roadie, but most of us know him as Road Dog Jesse James.
Wow.
Oh, you didn't know? Your ass better call somebody. It's me, it's that D-O-double-G. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, D-Generation X proudly brings to you one half of its WWF Tag Team Champions of the World, the Road Dogg, Jesse James.
Debuted in actually 1986. I don't think most of us knew he was around for that long because most of us know him more for his mid to late 90s run with Degeneration X. Obviously had a huge tag career with Badass Billy Gunn, but also had Hardcore Champion one time, Intercontinental Champion one time, 5-time tag with Billy Gunn, and then, well, 6-time, I guess, if you count one of them, in the WWE Hall of Fame as a member of Degeneration X this most recent year here in 2019. But also, the Wrestling Observer gave him the worst gimmick in 1996 when he was the real Double J, when he was the real singer, not Jeff Jarrett. So that was a great time, and until Jeff Jarrett left and they couldn't follow through with that storyline, which was bogus. Also spent some time in USWA, TNA, and a bunch of other independents. Matthew Stewart, Road Dogg Jesse James here in the upper 80s. What do you think of him? Is he deserving? And will we see Badass Billy Gunn or just Jesse James?
It's gonna be the thing. 'Cause I feel like Badass Billy Gunn had the better wrestling acumen. If he was better in the ring, I feel, but he was not as good on the mic. I mean. The mic skills that Road Dogg had were pretty unsurpassed. He was the mouthpiece in a lot of ways for Degeneration X. If you had everybody else just shut up and just had him run the show, it'd be perfectly fine. But it's funny you bring up the real Double J thing, because I remember watching that gimmick play out in that storyline. It was it was laughable, but it was also hilarious. And then, of course, Double J held Vince kind of hostage for money, a la, you know, Ultimate Warrior in a lot of ways too. I like Road Dogg. His wrestling is more tied to Billy Gunn and Degeneration X, you know, or you know. So I hope we see Billy Gunn, because if we don't, I'll have a problem with his placement on the list. To be honest with you.
All right. What do you think, Alex, about Jesse James coming in here?
He probably shouldn't be on the list at all, honestly. He's just sort of there. Good mic skills are good mic skills, but like Paul Heyman has good mic skills. Is he going to make our list of top wrestlers? You know, like, I mean, he's going for this whole Alfred Hitchcock gimmick now, right? Isn't that what?
It seems like it.
But I mean, no. He he's probably most known now for just being the only person on the roster or shows up on TV that's allowed to talk about AEW. Like, 'cause he seems to be the only one that makes reference to it and doesn't get in trouble. Unless, did he leave already? I can't remember.
I think he's gone.
Well, yeah. So he said a
Been
bunch of
final
stuff
straw.
and then got fired.
I don't know for sure. Don't quote me on that one. TV's Mr. Neal, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm not sure if he belongs on this list either. Although I don't want to like crap on every wrestler who doesn't have a very good in-ring acumen because, well, you know, Andre's got to be in here somewhere. And plus, you got guys like Bobby the Brain Heenan who did some wrestling and maybe wasn't the best, but like God, he's so important to the business. He should be at least acknowledged in some way. So yeah, I think it just comes down to the fact that he and Jeff Jarrett kind of pieced out that one time and doesn't really have a great history as far as sticking around. Yeah, he's not one of my favorites, really.
I would say really good mic skills, though,
Yeah,
if we're going to
definitely.
do that. It was one of the matchups we put up on Facebook. We actually did put him against Billy Gunn to see who people thought was more worthy of being in the top 100, or at least who was better than the other person. And it was interesting to see kind of how that played out and what people were judging as far as mic versus in-ring skills, like you guys kind of mentioned a couple different times there. I don't know. I go back and forth on those guys and who's more deserving. I don't know if either of them is deserving to necessarily be in the top 100, but on that poll we had Billy Gunn got more votes by about a third. So so that was how that turned out. So we'll have to see if that translates to our list or not.
And Billy Gunn, like, he still wrestles, looks like he can wrestle, and
Yeah.
and whereas he looks like he works at Arby's, like, like, you know, like, he just looks like you had to call the manager because there wasn't enough, you know, cheese. And then he comes out of the back looking all greasy with his balding hair. It still somehow has it in braids, and it's just like, okay, I'll give you more cheese. That's what he looks like. He doesn't look like he can wrestle.
Oh my, we're ripping. We're shots fired at Jesse James, I guess, on this one.
What a buzzkill.
Yeah, let's go to our number 85, which is a little bit older here, but somebody who had the distinct pleasure of being a fan favorite for his entire career. I do remember seeing him a little bit towards the end, and I do remember that the fans always reacted very well to him. I didn't have necessarily a connection to him one way or the other. Debuted in 1976, spent some time in the WWF early on, then went to the AWA, and then came back. He was an Intercontinental Heavyweight Champion when that was a thing. He was part of Strike Force. When I knew him, he was El Matador. We're talking about Tito Santana. Basically, Tito Santana or El Matador is what I remember him as. And then later on, he did do some other AWA and NWA and different regional and independent stuff. So very popular in the 70s and in the 80s. He was Tag Team of the Year, according to PWI, in 1979 with Ivan Putski. He got ranked the top 100 best singles wrestlers in 95 and in the PWI years, which came out in 2003. I was like, he wasn't wrestling in 2003, I don't think. He probably was, but not to be watched.
Somewhere.
He was ranked a best tag team with Ivan Putski and a best tag team with Rick Martel. I believe that was the Strike Force part. But WWF Intercontinental Champion twice, Tag Team Champion twice, King of the Ring, participant in 1989, WWE Hall of Fame in 2004. Matt, what do you think about Tito Santana? Did you ever see him?
I saw him during the strike because I loved him and Rick Martel, and especially Martel turned on Tito Santana. That was almost like the prototype to because did the Rockers break up before or after Strike Force?
After.
Was it after? Okay, so I guess they were just kind of riding the coattails of the Rockers breakup and things like that. But I liked how he continued to be the babyface. He was a great worker, I think, and that's kind of what I remember him as. He was kind of almost like a Ricky Steamboat. Of course, Ricky Steamboat to me is the far superior wrestler, but great worker. Had consistency in the ring, and I think he got more of a pop probably because Rick Martel turned on him, sprayed the arrogance in his face, and people love that. I love that. I mean, I love Rick Martel. So, but I'm also a heel guy. So, but Tito Santana, he fine. I'm glad he's above Jesse James. Tell you that much.
He's currently a Spanish teacher and a basketball coach at a middle school in New Jersey.
Right.
Alex, did you ever see Tito Santana, and do you think he deserves to be on the top 100?
No idea. Only from the cartoon. I don't even know what he looks like.
TV's Mr. Neal?
I remember him being around for a long time. I think he wrestled the first 9 WrestleManias, like back to back to back.
Something like that.
Yeah, little bit of trivia. He was the first guy to pin The Undertaker.
Oh, there we go.
In an untelevised match in Barcelona for some random reason. I don't remember why.
How does Undertaker keep making the trivia on all these guys? That's crazy.
I don't know. But, it kind of a vanilla baby face. I wasn't really that excited to ever see him. I watched his matches. I just wasn't a big Tito fan.
Yeah. Apparently the fans loved him though, and I do remember like even when I went back recently and watched some of the old WWE's pay-per-views, every time he was there, he did get a pretty decent pop on sometimes. So I never quite got it, but Tito Santana comes in here at number, I believe we're at 85 here. So let's go to number 84 and let's get a little international flavor on this one. We're going to go to somebody who debuted in 1984, did some work with WCCW, NWA, New Japan, All Japan, Wrestle One. He has 1,000 ring names. Some people, I'm just going to go through them real quick and see when you figure out who I'm talking about. We have the Space Lone Wolf, the Viet Cong Ming, the White Ninja, the Super Black Ninja, Kokushi, the Black Ninja again. His real name is Keiji Muto, but we probably know him as the Great Muda. So the Great Muda here is one of the wrestlers to hold the NWA World Heavyweight Championship, the AGPW Triple Crown Heavyweight Championship, and the IWGP, I can't even say all these things, Heavyweight Championship. He's got a lot of accolades internationally, as well as some time here spent in the States. He was ranked number 3 of the best singles wrestlers in 2002. And he's had lots of matches of the year, according to Tokyo Sports, Wrestling Observer newsletter. Obviously, Dave Meltzer is a huge Japanese fan, so he had the best wrestling maneuver in 2001, the match of the year in 2001, most improved wrestler in 2001, wrestler of the year in 2001, reader's favorite wrestler in 2001. So apparently 2001 was a good year for him. The Great Muda. Alex, what do you think?
I'd heard a lot about him, and I only ever saw him wrestle, I think this year. He was at, what was it, the G1 Supercard or something for New Japan?
That might be.
And he's got to be, what, in his 60s?
He is 56.
Oh.
Okay, well, he was still able to go for a few minutes. Wasn't he? He's not the originator of the Green Mist. He's somebody else.
The Muda Lock. He's the innovator of the Muda Lock, whatever that is.
But he was one of the guys that would spit venom or something.
Okay.
Yeah,
but there
was
somebody before him that did it in the 70s, but he's the one that's like known for it. That
Gotcha.
Like now people think of Tajiri when they think of that.
Might have been the Great Kabuki. No, I don't remember who.
Probably
something great. The great something. The Great Green Mist Spitter.
Matthew or Neil, any experience seeing the Great Muda, or what are your thoughts on somebody that's mainly known for his work in Japan showing up here at 84?
Just very slight memories of accidentally landing on NWA in the 80s, occasionally seeing him wrestle Ric Flair. Basically seeing him more in just seeing old matches more recently. I haven't really experienced him all that much, not back in the day anyway. Do you remember he popped up as a member of the NWO in the late 90s at one point for some reason?
Yeah. I remember taking quizzes online of like name all the members of the NWO, and I was like, why am I missing so many? And then I forgot there was like 300 of them.
Everybody.
Yeah,
Everybody
from Japan.
Like, this is the international branch of the NWO.
It was. I think we might get some flack here for what happens next because we're going to go from one international star to another. And I want to say that a lot of maybe people would think that Great Muta should outrank this guy, but this is probably somebody who we are more well aware of. So we're going to go to somebody who debuted in 1987, born in Japan as well. He was known as the Tiger Dragon, Yoshihiro Asai, and the Ultimo Dragon. So the Ultimo Dragon comes in here at number 83. We probably know him most for his work in WCW, but obviously did spend a lot of time in Japan and had a brief stint in WWE in 2003, 2004. As far as some of his accomplishments that we would know about, he was WCW Cruiserweight Championship champion twice, WCW World Television Champion twice. He got also voted the best wrestling maneuver in 1996 for his running Liger Bomb, most underrated in 2003. And I don't think he ever got anything with WWF as far as accolades. He was not there very long. So, Ultimo Dragon, what do you think, Alex, of this pick here?
I've never seen him. Don't even know what he looks like.
Oh my goodness! You need to go back and do you have the network?
Yeah, remember, I'm probably one of the younger people here.
stuff.
So
I would very much say that you should go search out some of his WCW matches that he had with like Chris Jericho, or like Chris Benoit.
Because to me, that name sounds lucha and not Japanese.
Yeah, Ultimo.
Yeah, he was kind of one of the ones that was in there with like Juventud Guerrero and La Parca and a couple other guys, but he always stood out because he had some great matches in WCW. I don't know which, like if I could point to a specific match, but I know
wait,
Rey Mysterio.
Is this the guy that was his gimmick was he would tell people that he was Bruce Lee's last student or something stupid like that?
I don't know if I ever heard
remember
that.
talk a lot.
I remember that was like the backstory or something they were trying to sell.
Oh.
And I was like, that doesn't make any sense because they're talking about this guy debuting in the 80s and Bruce Lee died like 15 years earlier.
Yeah, I never heard that, but he had some great matches with Rey Mysterio as well. I also remember that he was a part of one of the video games. I don't know if it was NWO or WCW World Tour or WCW versus NWO, but his character was really good in that game, and if you picked him, you had a good shot. Not as good a shot as you had if you picked Glacier because that kick knocked everybody out. But Ultimate Dragon was a fun character to have, and you could change his ring.
Oh. Okay, well, please don't tell me that Glacier's higher on the list than this.
Oh God!
if we were talking about best people to be in a wrestling video game, Glacier would be in my top 100 because that kick literally knocked everybody out. I don't know why.
Because he looks like now he looks like a fat Duke Nukem in a Sub-Zero suit.
Matt, any other thoughts on Ultimo Dragon showing up on our list?
I'm glad this is our first. I don't want to call him a loser, but I mean, in a lot of ways, he had the thing to him a little bit, and he fought a lot of luchadors anyway. So I'm glad we're starting to get like the cruiserweight kind of element into the list.
One of the best parts of WCW, the cruiserweight division.
Exactly. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right. Well,
not better than 205 Live though. I mean, come on.
There is one little interesting bit of trivia. I love this guy, by the way, but he for like 6 days in like 1996, he held the WWF light heavyweight championship and the WCW cruiserweight championship simultaneously. Somebody pulled a major sneaky and got him in because that WWF title was exclusive to Japan for a while. So somehow, they brought him in, and
please tell me there's pictures of holding both.
I don't think so. I don't think they allowed him to do that, but apparently Vince was not very happy, and then they brought the light cruiserweight championship back to WWF.
All right, so let's move on from Ultimo Dragon to our number 82 on the list, and you guys will definitely all know who this gentleman is, at least at various points of his career. I like doing this, though. I like reading the ring names and seeing when you guys are going to have like the light bulb go off. He debuted in 1992, retired in 2009, had the ring names of Bad Santa, Death Mask. The rest are going to give it away, maybe not. Vampiro Americano is not going to give it away. Johnny Hawk, Justin Hawk,
Oh my God.
Okay, there we
Black
go.
Jack Bradshaw, or maybe
Yes.
just JBL. John Bradshaw Layfield is our number 82 on the list. He spent some time with Global Wrestling Federation in the early 90s, some international time, NWA 94, 95, and then the WWF, WWE from there on out. We had the new Blackjacks, we had the Acolytes, the APA, I'll just say, and a lot of other stuff. So let's see here. He was voted Best Gimmick in 2004, Worst Television Announcer in 2014 and in 2015.
Okay.
Most disgusting promotional tactic in 2014. I guess he insulted people that bought the pay-per-view.
Maybe there was also a point where he was he was very against like Mexicans and stuff. So it might be that.
That little tidbit too. Yeah.
He got a Slammy in his trophy case. He was the 20th Triple Crown champion, the 10th Grand Slam champion, one-time WWE champion, one-time Intercontinental, one-time US, 18-time Hardcore, one-time European, and 3-time Tag Team champion with Farouk. That's a whole lot of championships. Alex, is JBL worthy of being on our list, and how do you feel about him slotting in here at 82?
I think he might be WWE's last real heel that was unredeemable, was happy with that, seemed to gleefully take pride in what he did. I might be wrong, but did he not go to did they not film a promo of him defending the border from people coming over?
Yes. I wouldn't
put it past him.
Because that might be the whole most shameful thing. That might be it.
He still believes in kayfabe, that's why.
Yeah, and I mean, he known as a bully behind the scenes, and ultimately, you know what? It's bad, but at the same time, if it fires people up to have better matches, they don't really have good guys and bad guys anymore, and the product suffers because of it. He Del Rio and all these other people that have been heels since him are not really heels. Like even The Miz isn't really a heel.
No,
JBL is the last headlining champion heel.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Anybody else thoughts on JBL?
Probably not the best person in the world, but really funny. I have to give it to him. And to be fair, Eddie Guerrero was the champion who dropped the belt to him, and Eddie did want to work with him. So that was Eddie's choice. So take of that what you may.
Apparently very good with money, too.
Yeah, definitely. He didn't he write a book or something?
Yeah, wrote a book about
he's on Fox Business and everything too. He's been on TV, and
I know he lost that contract. He lost the deal with the financial shows because of what he was doing on WWE, though.
Oh,
he had to go on. He had to go on what was it, MSNBC or whatever the financial channel he was on. He had to basically explain on air that he had to expose
here's what wrestling is.
Yeah, he had to expose the wrestling business 20 years after it was exposed by saying who I play on TV is not who I am as a person. And it's I could just see Vince going, stop.
Kayfabe is real, it's back.
Yeah, so I think he lives in, was it Barbados or the Bahamas or something?
Nice.
And he deserves to be on there if just for one thing, starting Tribute to the Troops and running that every year.
Yeah, that's for sure. All right, so JBL here at number 82. We already talked about one tag team that we got one member of. We're going to have another tag team that we're going to talk about at least one member, and we'll have to see if the other member shows up or not. For number 81, we're going to go to somebody that was named the Terminator at one point. Also, Mongo Vile, debuted in 1991. But most people know him as either Bully, Bubba, or Brother Ray Dudley.
Yeah, we coming now. Get up, drop the bombshell. Get up, this is out of control. Get up, drop the bombshell. Get up.
So he is coming in next. Mark LaMonaco is his real name. So obviously a good deal of his time in ECW in the late 90s, and then WWF, and then TNA, and some independents and the like. So as far as accolades go, with just mainly the WWF ones, he was hardcore champion 10 times, tag team 8 times with Devon. That was World Tag Team. Then you had the WWE tag, and then you had the WCW tag, and he was inducted into the Hall of Fame in 2018. A bunch of stuff in TNA that I'm not going to read because it would take too much time. Obviously had match of the year in the TLC match. Tag team of the year once, according to PWI, an 8-time ECW tag team with Devon Dudley. So TV's Mr. Neal, one of the Dudleys, falling here at number 81. Is he deserving, and will we see Devon, or is it just Bubba Ray?
Well, I can't imagine Devon being higher than Bubba Ray. I think Bubba Ray was definitely the standout of the two, so he should be on the list higher if Devon was going to be on here at all. I actually kind of like the Bully Ray gimmick. One of the few unique things that happened in TNA involving a former WWF or ECW wrestler to kind of recreate someone like that. Not really a whole lot else to say about him, just because I think of him so much as a tag team wrestler and don't really I don't really differentiate him away from the Dudley Boys as much as I do other standout performers that came from tag teams, like Bret Hart. So that's pretty much what I have to say.
Okay, Matthew Stewart, what do you think of Bubba Ray? Do you agree that if Devon was going to appear, he would have already done it?
Yeah, I have a feeling. Devon did have like the Preacher Devon gimmick, which I thought was hilarious at the same time. But if you didn't have Devon, if you had Devon, I would expect Bubba Ray to follow later on. But I think this is going to be the one of the two. I guess one of the three, however many Dudley Boys it were.
Spike's not going to come up here. Come on,
Spike's not showing up. He's too busy being an elementary school teacher, English teacher, whatever he was in that Beyond the Ring documentary. I didn't really see a lot of stuff from TNA with the Bully Ray gimmick, so I'm not familiar with that. But I mean, anybody who's willing to just powerbomb old women through tables, you got to be in the top 80 then at that point, right? I mean, am I right or am I wrong?
I mean, you can make that argument.
I'm absolutely incorrect.
Alex, what do you think of Bully or Bubba, or whichever way you want to go showing up?
Yeah, he's the only one of the Dudleys that really should be there, and I think he's one of the only people keeping Ring of Honor together now, because he's like, they have like one person signed there that, like, other than Jay Lethal, it's like him, and everybody else is just whomever AEW and Impact didn't want to buy. So, and I think there's like, there might be like one former other veteran there, but like he does make his mark pretty much wherever he goes. He became much better on the mic at TNA than you could have ever expected him to be. From what I hear, he's kind of a prick. So,
no kidding.
270 plus wrestlers got votes. Spike Dudley, not one of them. So take that for what you will. He will not be showing up on the list. So we have 5 spots left to go today. Next, we're going to go to another person that had a career in the 70s and 80s mostly, and maybe just the early 90s that some people might remember. He debuted in 1975. He had the ring name of the Midnight Stallion and the Outlaw. But most people probably know him as just his regular old name, which is Tully Blanchard.
You wanna sail an ocean or make a commotion?
No relation.
Tully Blanchard coming in here at 80. Southwest Championship Wrestling, NWA Jim Crockett Promotions, WWF. A lot of time in there. As far as accolades, he was NWA Hall of Fame in 2009. He was Feud of the Year in PWI's 1987 for the Four Horsemen versus the Superpowers and the Road Warriors. Tag Team of the Year 1989 with Arn Anderson. And ranked 52 in the top 500 single wrestlers of the PWI years. WWF World Tag Team Champion one time with Arn Anderson, and WWE Hall of Fame in 2012 as a member of the Four Horsemen. TV's Mr. Neal, what do you think of Tully Blanchard showing up here at number 80?
Good place for him. I wish I was more familiar with him. I know him mostly from his run in WWF because that's what I was watching at the time. I've seen a little bit of his WCW stuff. He's basically a very talented wrestler. One of the good technicians of the time. Wish I had more to say about him. I think he belongs on the list. Definitely.
His legacy is continuing as his daughter Tessa is a female wrestler who's been making some strides. Alex, what do you think of Tully Blanchard? I know it's probably a little bit before your time, but you might have heard of him with the Brainbusters and the Four Horsemen.
Yeah, I hear about him all the time. He's still relevant. I mean, he signed to AEW as a manager for the former Ty Dillinger. He, from seeing his promos and what appearances he's made now, he looks like he can still go, which is pretty surprising. Because I know not everybody has seen the new pay-per-view, so I won't comment on that. But I will say that he has a thing that's missing now from a lot of even current younger wrestlers is that a calm intensity. Like he looks scary without having to make a face, and you can see everything's in his eyes. And he has that sort of Jake the Snake thing where he can whisper what he's saying, and it's scarier than if he was screaming in your face like Ric Flair.
Yeah, it's like one of those men of few words that when he does talk, you listen. Trained by Jose Lothario. I think some people will remember that name. No relation to TFG1 Mike Blanchard. And he was
many words.
He's 65 years old, and I guess if we were keeping track, he is born in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. Matthew Stewart, any other thoughts on Tully Blanchard?
I'm not familiar with him. I mean, knowing that he's from the Four Horsemen already, that really great pedigree, and and I think he came up in our tag team top 100 tag team list too with Brainbusters with Arn Anderson. But yeah, I mean, seeing the way he still works, he can work a crowd without having to say a lot. And to Alex's point, yeah, it's something that's kind of lost upon everybody trying to run down the ring or get the crowd pumped. I want that old school wrestling intensity like a Jake the Snake or something like that, where you just go out there, you tell the story with kind of like your simple actions as opposed to screaming into a microphone. And yeah, I mean, just kind of seeing the promos for AEW, I mean, he still looks like a badass who can still whoop the shit out of you. So I do like that. So yeah, I mean, I'm all for him being above Jesse James or Road Dogg. I'm not gonna give that up, man.
It's going to be the trend for the rest of the time.
I cannot forgive it.
It'd be interesting to see. I do believe it makes sense if we're looking at the classic, or not classics, but the guys from like the late 70s, early 80s, that he is above Paul Orndorff a little bit. I would put him in that order. So that makes sense to me. I'm interested to get your guys' take on our number 79. It has been a while since we have had a female representative of the list, and we're going back there with this one. How about a female that made her debut? Well, first off, does anybody know somebody that went by the ring name the Spider Lady?
Oh, yes.
Made a debut in 1949. They have her retired listing date as 2007. That's not accurate. I mean, let's define retirement here. We're talking about Mary Lillian Ellison, better known as the Fabulous Moolah.
Oh, baby.
This is old school, like we had with Gorgeous George, I guess, and Vern Gagne, but definitely had some accomplishments. WWF Women's Champion 4 times, Hall of Fame in 1995. Did get the Wrestling Observer Worst Match of the Year in 1984 versus Wendy Richter. But let's come on, she was past her prime at that point.
Yeah, well, that's when that was not the screw job, is when they stole the belt, right? So
yeah.
I mean, if for anybody that doesn't know what she looks like, remember that episode of The Simpsons when Marge used a shotgun to blast her makeup on? That's kind of what she looked like.
She did pass away 12 years ago at the age of 84, but obviously had a huge role in early women's wrestling. So, Alex, we'll start with you just real quickly. Fabulous Moolah, our third female representative, deserving or not?
She's one of those ones where she
It's a
she
complicated thing.
made her mark pivotally important, but not necessarily for the right reasons. Depending on who you ask, she either furthered women's wrestling or held it back 20 years.
Right.
So for the longest time, history is written by the victors, right? So, and WWE loved her, so they would praise her and build her up, but then ask any other promotion and they say she was a pariah and a pimp and all this horrible stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that she was like the worst serial abuser of her staff ever, compared to any promoter. So it really depends on who you ask. It's probably somewhere down the middle. I don't genuinely think that she thought she was doing anything wrong. I just think that she wasn't necessarily a very good person.
Yeah, I could see that argument being made. Matthew or Neil, any thoughts on Fabulous Moolah?
I think it's become more of her being infamous, and especially now when they were going to do the whole Fabulous Moolah Battle Royal and that too, and that basically got shouted down by everybody saying you can't make this a thing because she was a pimp and she did all these horrible. I mean, to Alex's point, depends who you ask to. Depends who you ask. If you ask half these people, they'll say she helped my career. She did this for me. The other part of it is like she pimped me out. She basically put me on the road, used me up, and threw me away as soon as I was done. So it's a very complicated legacy, but I'm glad she's not really any higher. Probably more for the recency bias of what we know about her now or what we've heard about her, depending on what story you want to kind of believe from her. So
yeah, she's only on this list high because of the length of her reign. Like if you go by actual wrestling, she's a terrible wrestler, always was. She just had power. So like Trish, 100 million times better. She was. I mean, basically any women wrestler that wasn't part of the bra and panty matches is a better wrestler than her.
I guess that's where the line is. I guess we'll get into this probably later with other maybe people where it's like, how will you climb this list based on acumen of wrestling knowledge and being able to wrestle, or having the everlasting legacy of what she did? So it's going to be interesting to see as we get later on. But yeah, it's complicated. It's one of these like, you kind of feel disgusting talking about her, but you also, I don't know. There's a lot of stories about her that you just don't really know what to believe. So
yeah, it's just a combination of her not being a very good wrestler and also being rather infamous. And I don't really like her, and I think I would rather watch Gorgeous George versus Charles Robinson like for 8 hours than watch a Fabulous Moolah match.
I agree. All right, let's move on to our final three here. Our number 78. Let's play this game again. How about Kip? How about Cute Kip? How about Kip James? How about Kip Montana? Yeah. How about Kip Sop? How about Kip Winchester? How about the G-Man? How about the Outlaw? How about the Kipper? Rockabilly? Billy G? Mr. Ass? We're talking about badass Billy Gunn here at number 78.
I'm an ass man. Yeah, I'm an ass man.
So we had Jesse James at 86. We have Billy Gunn at 78. So they both did appear here. Obviously, a huge tag team with Bart Gunn in the 90s. Maybe not huge, but a tag team that we're going to remember as the Smoking Guns. But then obviously hooked up with the Road Dogg and the D-Generation X, etc. And missed, some other stuff after that as a singles wrestler. So King of the Ring in 1999, WWE Hall of Fame in this year with D-Generation X. He was a 2-time hardcore champion, a 1-time Intercontinental Champion, a 1-time Tag Team Champion with a Road Dogg, and a 10-time WWE WWF Tag Team Champion with Bart Gunn, Road Dogg, and Chuck. So a lot of interesting stuff here from badass Billy Gunn. TV's Mr. Neil, what do you think? And did we get this in the right order with Jesse James at 86 and Billy Gunn at 78, or are neither of them deserving them to be in the top 100?
Billy Gunn is definitely deserving of being on the top 100, and definitely deserving of being higher than his partner Jesse James. Very good tag team wrestler. I don't really like him as a singles wrestler all that much. I didn't like Mr. Ass. I don't know. I just found that like a little too obnoxious being named Mr. Ass.
What about the Billy and Chuck stuff?
Oh yeah.
Oh my God!
You know what? You know what?
That's
Say
so
you can say the climate's different. That would still be great today if presented a certain way, because that was golden. It was a little too crass for the time, but you could work with that now, and it's probably what more younger people are going to remember him from. And like he wrestles, I think, with his son occasionally now, and he's head of talent relations or something at AEW.
Oh yeah.
I got a confession to make. In the early 90s or mid 90s when the smoking guns were a thing, I actually liked Bart Gunn better. But then,
Until
you
he
know,
was in the boxing.
yes, and then it all went downhill.
I gotta say, my favorite Smoking Guns match is the rematch between them and Yokozuna and Owen Hart from Raw. I think it was sometime summer '95.
Yeah,
really, really funny ending. You gotta find it and watch it.
He's had a lot of different personas and a lot of different revivals and kind of times. He also, I didn't mention, but he spent some time in the TNA as well in the mid 2000s. So, Matthew, did I get your opinion, or anybody else did I miss as far as Billy Gunn?
No, I like him. I like him on the list. I mean, I could have maybe put him down where Jesse James was and put Jesse James completely off the list. I think I liked him as a single wrestler. I liked Generation X. I love the Mr. Ass gimmick because it was just so over the top, stupid, ridiculous. And you had the finishing move, the famouser. I mean, it is probably one of the more, I don't know. I love that finisher. I thought it was really cool looking. It made an impact. Kind of was like famouser out of nowhere. You know, you can almost like scream it if you really wanted to. And then the Billy and Chuck stuff was crass, but it was kind of progressive at the time. And if you did it a different way, like Alex said, now you can make it kind of like the Golden Lovers type thing with like, New Japan and stuff like that. If you package it a certain way and make it more progressive as opposed to regressive.
Not do that
really
wedding.
Cool. Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
stupid wedding. We're not gay. Just throwing out the whole gimmick.
Yeah.
or you could have done it the same way and then be like, have the manager say, well, yeah, you're playing gay, and then have them talk secretly like, no, we actually did fall in love. Like,
yeah, exactly. Like this isn't fake.
Like the manager still thinks it's fake, but they secretly just actually fell in love. You could have worked that into it, and then have them turn on the manager turn on them, and then it's a whole thing.
So, all right, let's move on to our number 77, second to last pick of the day here. I'm going to do this one more time. How about stop me when you've heard of him? The Lone Wolf, the Widowmaker, Dirty Yellow Dog, the Stalker, Blackjack Mulligan Jr., Blackjack Wyndham, or like we most know him, Barry Windham.
Southern born, Southern bred. When I die, I'll be Southern dead. We like to watch our wrestling every week on TV. Our favorite show is Andy Yummy Barry.
So debuted in 1979, trained by Blackjack Mulligan and Harley Race. Spent time in all different places: NWA, Jim Crockett, WWF, Turnbuckle Championship Wrestling. He was WWE Hall of Fame in 2012 as a member of the Four Horsemen, WWF Tag Team Champions twice with Mike Rotunda /IRS, if people know him more like that. Voted Most Improved Wrestler of the Year by PWI in 1982 and made all kinds of their list as far as tag teams with Mike Rotunda, with Lex Luger, and with Dustin Rhodes, and top 500 singles wrestlers a couple different times there as well. So a lot of NWA gold as well. So TV's Mr. Neal, what do you think of Barry Windham? Kind of another one of those classic 70s, 80s, early 90s wrestlers that's making the list.
Yeah, I do like Barry Windham. Oddly enough, another one of these guys, I know him career when he was in WCW in the late 90s. I do know that he and Rotundo had the Real American theme song before Hulk Hogan did. And I'm going to mention this here because I don't want to mention this during the Mr. Perfect, because I know Mr. Perfect is going to be way farther down the list. The West Texas Rednecks. One of my favorite gimmicks in wrestling ever, just because it was WCW trying to be so hip and forgetting that they were that they were based out of Georgia. So they're trying to make an evil stable of country singers, and of course the fans completely flipped on it and cheered on the West Texas Rednecks and booed the rappers. It was hysterical.
That was Kendall Windham, Kurt Hennig, Bobby Duncombe Jr., and Barry Windham as the West Texas Rednecks.
They played that song on country stations all over the country. It was great.
I like that song a lot.
Also was a part of the U.S. Express as far as the tag team there. Interesting, though, if you're stacking up the guys that we've had from this era and kind of how you guys would do it, because we had Paul Orndorff come first, then Junkyard Dog, then Tito Santana, then Tully Blanchard, and now Barry Windham. I don't know if that's the right order or not, but that's the ones we've had. Matthew Stewart, what do you think of all this? And Barry Windham coming in at 77.
I mean, I don't know a lot about it. Was Barry Windham in that match with Gold Dust when they're in the truck during WCW and they weren't supposed to bleed? Or was that Barry Windham?
Is he one of the ones that got fired
when he was a Blackjack Bully or something, like the Blacktop Bully or something like that?
Blacktop Bully.
Yeah, that's the only thing I really remember him for, if that was even him.
I don't remember if that's. I know that you're talking about. I know the two people got fired was Dustin Rhodes and somebody else.
Yeah.
But I don't know if he was the one. So.
Well, that goes to tell you, I don't know much about Barry Windham,
Alex,
except for the West Texas Rednecks.
This is one of those cases where I've heard the name a bunch of times, no idea what he looks like.
All right, well, let's move on then to number 76. We'll have to have the fans weigh in on if we got those 80s wrestlers in the right order or not. Somebody that also started in 1985 but didn't retire until 2006, Crusher Yurkoff. That's the only name that you guys wouldn't know because everybody else knows him as Bam Bam Bigelow.
Bam, bam.
Scott Charles Bigelow. He died about 12 years ago at the age of 45. But I think the one thing that comes out loud and clear, and you hear this a lot on the podcast that I listen to as well, is that when he was doing his early WWF stuff in like 1987, 1988, he was not very old. We're talking about like early to mid 20s. And he was known for obviously being somebody that was really big, large man that could move and be agile. So he's coming in at number 76. Matthew, what do you think of his appearance right here?
I love Bam Bam Bigelow. He was almost like a proto Samoa Joe. I mean, he doesn't have the same wrestling acumen as Samoa Joe, but he can do moonsaults. He could be a high flyer. He could do cartwheel. I remember him doing a lot of cartwheels in the ring at one point. So I was like, what is this guy doing? But I thought it was always hilarious to be this big rotund guy in a onesie with flames all over him.
That was one of his moves in the NES game, by the way. The cartwheel.
That's awesome.
Was it the cartwheel?
Yeah.
Of course it was.
That's awesome.
But I like it. And then, of course, you can't forget about the thing as well, too, with that WrestleMania. Was that WrestleMania 13 or something like that? I like Bam Bam Bigelow, and he was part of like Money Inc. And then he got kicked out because he wasn't doing his job right. And then
Jersey Triad in WCW?
Yeah, something like that. And I don't know. I mean, I liked him because he was a guy that can move, and he had like one missing front tooth that always really stuck out to me a lot. He looked like from like New Jersey, the Beast from the East, and everything too. Yeah, I liked him. And 45, I didn't even realize he was that young. He passed away, but that's kind of a shame, man. Yeah.
He's WCW Hardcore Champion one time, WCW World Tag Team Champion twice with Diamond Dallas Page and Chris Kanyon as the Jersey Triad. Got a Slammy Award in 1987 for Best Head. I don't know what that criteria if that is.
Gabe the
That can be
best
taken
man?
a lot of different ways. He was named
tattoos.
Wrestling Observer named him as the Rookie of the Year in 1986. And how about this? The worst worked match of the year in 1993 this is a Survivor Series match. If you remember it, Bastion Booger, the Head Shrinkers, Bushwhackers, and Men on a Mission. There was turkey legs and food all over the ring. It was a disaster. It never held a WWE belt that I know of. He also appeared in the movies Major Payne, Joe's Apartment, Ready to Rumble. Bam Bigelow, TV's Mr. Neal. Any thoughts on him?
Well, I remember the Lawrence Taylor thing was the main event of WrestleMania 11.
Right.
11. Okay. That's what it was.
Yeah, that's probably his biggest event. He main evented WrestleMania 11, sort of. It was the last match on the card anyway. Don't remember too much about his early run. I do remember that he was the last man standing in the Survivor Series, the original Survivor Series, where it was like Hogan's team versus Andre's team, and it was him and Andre at the end, and he was kind of doing cartwheels trying to get out of the way of Andre. He was doing like all sorts of like really impressive stuff for a guy his size, and ended up not being the victor in that. But it was really a shame he didn't last very long. He was gone by WrestleMania 4, I think. But yeah, he was pretty good.
Alex, either thoughts on Bam Bigelow, or now that you've seen numbers 100 through 76, just thoughts on overall the names that have been revealed today.
It's an interesting mix. As far as he's concerned, to me, it's almost like he's the prototype ECW wrestler.
Yes.
Like it's like they looked at him and went, "How could we make an entire roster of this craziness?"
Yeah, basically. But yeah, I just always knew that people talked about him being, impressive for how much he could do for a big man. That was the big thing about him. Interesting, if we look at the list so far, we had a couple international folks with Ultimo Dragon and Great Muta. I guess those were about the only two we got from there. We did have Taz and Raven for ECW. We had females Trish Stratus, Nia Jackson, Fabulous Moolah. I don't know if that's the right trio. And then some interesting classic wrestlers, old school ones with Vern Gagne and Gorgeous George. Not too many modern wrestlers that I can think of that we talked about besides maybe Samoa Joe. And that's about, and I guess Nia Jax could put in that group as well. So, Matthew, what do you think of the ones that were revealed so far? I know you're not a fan of Jesse James being involved, and Fabulous Moolah. Anybody else that should be kicked out for the likes of some of the people we talked about at the beginning? Sergeant Slaughter, Greg Valentine.
I mean, I'm surprised that Roman Reigns didn't crack the top one. When I'm seeing wrestlers, it's like Roman Reigns. Is it just because people hate Roman? They die, Roman die. I mean, the guy has cancer. Give the guy a break. Come on.
He's going to show up. I can tell because there's people like Blanchard that probably put him at like number 2. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah,
but like if it was me, it's like he's got a look, but he's nothing special. I don't know if I ranked him at all.
I don't think I did either, so I'm not really upset about it. But just for recency, I don't know who's voting in like the list and who's voting for this and everything. But I'm upset. Yeah. I'm upset that we didn't get any occupational gimmick wrestlers in the top.
The Goon's probably coming up soon, right?
The Goon has to be there. Duke the Dumpster Drosy, Repo.
Yankum. Who else?
Yankum.
Well, Yankum will be there, just not as Yankum.
He'll be there in some way. Yeah.
Well, Repo Man, that wrestler, oh my God, what's his name? He had
Barry Darso.
Barry Darso had so many gimmicks. Many gimmicks. Does each gimmick count separately, or does he get to go? Do all of them count toward one guy?
They'll count towards one guy.
Okay, so he might actually still be on the list.
So is that same thing for Mick Foley? Like you can't count his separate characters as one person, right?
I think we included everybody together.
One that's surprising that I wish would have been on. He's not going to be any higher. I know that. But would have been great for this last section. Would have been like the Brooklyn Brawler, somebody that was with the company for 35 years or whatever.
Yeah. Barry Horowitz, something like that.
I mean, I was hoping Tatanka would sneak in here, but he didn't at this point. So
I would have figured Tatanka would have been like 90 something, but like Brawler, it's one that the reason he's not here is everybody forgets he exists. And then he'll show up and it'll be like, oh shit, he's been with the company since like 83 and he's still there.
Another guy that I would have pegged for this part of the list would have been, that was known for a lot of different things, would have been Papa Shango / Kamal Mustafa / Godfather. I would have thought somebody like that maybe had a bunch of different time periods that he represented might have shown up in this part of the list as well.
terrible wrestler in all of them. So
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
So that is our 100 through 76. We will tease you for a little while, for another week or so before we put out the next episode. So you kind of have 7 days to yell at us and tell us what we got right and wrong and all this other jazz. And then we'll come back with numbers 75 through 51 in our next episode. So might have the same people, might have some additional guests. We'll never know what's going to hit you in the wrestling ring. So we always try to surprise you here. But just real quick, everybody go around and tell people what you do online, or if you have anything you want to pimp out, or Twitter handles or anything like that. Alex, how can people get in contact with you or keep in touch with what you do?
Well, I basically run all the back end stuff at This Week in Geek. So thisweekingeek.net. I'm on Twitter, DeathfaceTwig, or just at This Week in Geek. A bit of stuff with GCRN as well, but I'm sort of I'm the tech guy at at This Week in Geek. I run the website and everything for Birdman.
Sounds good. Matthew Stewart, how can people hear more of your voice?
All right. You can always go to simplisticreviews.net. We did a complete overhaul of the entire website. Much more sleek, much more easier to navigate. So that's really exciting. And DJ and I and Justin, we're a trifecta, so to speak, for Simplistic Reviews. And we just started the new video series that's on YouTube. It is simply storytelling, where we give each other movies we have not ever seen before in our lives, and we have a certain amount of time to explain this movie the way we see this movie fits. So that's the cool new fun stuff. But yeah, simplisticreviews.net is where you can find all the good fun stuff, podcast videos, yucks, everything else in between.
TV's Mr. Neil, Twitter handle, or how can people get in touch with you?
Well, I'm an illustrator, so I have a website, deceian.com. I do silly action cartoons, and I do occasional commissions for people. I also have ratinghipster.com, in which I do podcasting stuff, and I show up on the network here occasionally. And you can get in contact with me on Twitter at Peelin Bailey, which is associated with my webcomic. So that's about it.
Excellent. And you can obviously follow all things network related by searching out Geekcast Radio Network on either Facebook or Twitter. My individual Twitter is at Optimus Solo if you have a question for me or anything about the top 100s, because I'm usually involved some way, shape, or form with those. And we will have other content coming through the network. I know Steve's got Altered Geek going out. Mike has the pull bag. We also have some He-Man reviews for Tooncast and Powers of Grayskull, so you can keep track of all that stuff by either following us on Twitter or Facebook. So do that now, and catch us next week as we reveal numbers 75 through 51. We'll see you then.
At ease, maggot.
You just made the list. All clear.
It's cutting into your exercise time. It's stabbing you in the back nine. And it's attacking your peace of mind. It's pain, and it's getting in between you and the life you want to live. CBD Medic targets your pain at its source. It's fast-acting relief with active OTC ingredients, plus the added benefits of THC-free hemp oil. Get back to your life with CBD Medic, available online and at CVS. These statements have not been evaluated by the FDA. This product is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. It's cutting into your exercise time. It's stabbing you in the back nine. And it's attacking your peace of mind. It's pain, and it's getting in between you and the life you want to live. CBD Medic targets your pain at its source. It's fast-acting relief with active OTC ingredients, plus the added benefits of THC-free hemp oil. Get back to your life with CBD Medic, available online and at CVS. These statements have not been evaluated by the FDA. This product is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease.